the New York Declaration for Men and Boys, which we wrote in March of this year. And also you will see a Gender Equality for Men t-shirts flyer. The shirts are in the back of the room, and at 6:30 there'll be a photo op where we'll all get our picture taken. So we're honored to gather here today in Washington, D.C. to continue a movement that's restoring balance to the national conversation on gender equality. And this is more than symbolic. It's purposeful, strategic, and rooted in the conviction that true equality must include men and boys. As many of you know, the month of November holds special meaning. While March honors women's history, November is Men's Equality Month, a time that we set aside to acknowledge and respond to the 12 areas of male inequality where men are falling behind. Just in March, we wrote that declaration for the New York Declaration for Men and Boys, summarizing these 12 items of male inequality, the problems they face, and the proposed solutions we're fighting for. This document is divided into 9 sections, which address all 12 areas of male inequality. And as I mentioned, you'll see that in your packet. They are as follows: physical health and well-being. Men's health is being neglected on a global scale. Men live on average 5 years less than women. The gap exists in nearly every country. Suicide rates among men are 3 times higher than women. And despite this, most countries don't have a dedicated office of men's health. We call for men fairly represented in health research and establishing offices of men's health in governments worldwide. Mental health and suicide prevention. Men aren't getting the help they need. Societal expectations tell men to be strong, never ask for help, but this silence is costing lives. Young men today face higher rates of addiction, depression, and deaths of despair. Yet, most mental health outreach doesn't speak to men in ways that resonates with them. We call for promoting models of masculinity that embrace emotional well-being, expanding male-focused mental health initiatives, and a national suicide prevention efforts that address male suicide directly. Education and lifelong learning. Boys are now less likely than girls to finish school in over 100 countries. Boys are dropping out at higher rates, struggling with literacy, and disengaging from learning. Men are now the minority, yet policies designed to support underrepresented groups exclude them. We call for interventions to improve boys' literacy and engagement, more male teachers and mentors, and fair and equal access to scholarships. Family and shared parenting. Family courts assume mothers should have primary custody even when fathers are fit and willing to parent. Parental alienation is a real issue where children are manipulated into rejecting a parent, most often their father. Child support laws can turn fatherhood into a financial obligation rather than a meaningful relationship. We call for equal shared parenting laws, removing financial incentives that increase parental conflict, and recognizing parental alienation as a serious form of child abuse. Justice and equality before the law. Men receive harsher prison sentences than women for the same crimes. False allegations ruin innocent lives, yet in most cases, there's no consequences for making it. Due process is being eroded in domestic cases where the falsely accused can be punished without solid evidence. We call for upholding due process and the presumption of innocence, ensuring impartial investigations, and addressing sentencing disparities. If men and women commit the same crime, they should face the same consequences. Workplace safety and economic opportunity. Men make up nearly all workplace fatalities, high-risk jobs, lack male-focused safety measures, and men face stigma when they enter caregiving roles, such as teaching or nursing. We commit to stronger workplace safety policies and promoting men's access to caregiving careers. Paternal justice and reproductive rights. Men have no say in decisions about the embryos they helped create. Paternity fraud is real, yet the law often forces men to pay child support even when they're not the biological father. We call for fair policies on frozen embryos. Both parents should have a say in what happens to it, and reforming child support laws to protect against paternity fraud. Addressing violence against men and boys. Men are 78% of homicide victims. Male victims of domestic violence cases are often ignored. Boys are at a higher risk of child labor, war recruitment, and exploitation. We call for services for male victims of domestic abuse, recognition of male victimization in global policies. Fair representation of men and boys in the media. The common and offensive narrative of male traits are a bad message to boys that they're worthless and their lives are meaningless, resulting in a boy crisis. As Warren Farrell tells us, boys who hurt us. We call for a renewed message that men are the backbone of society. Men getting hurt isn't funny. Men's Equality Month was established in 2024 by this council to ensure that gender equality becomes a shared promise, not a one-sided pursuit. It's not a reaction. It's a resolution to elevate those who have gone overlooked for too long. This month also corresponds to a global day of recognition, International Men's Day, held every year on November 19th. It was launched in 1999 by Dr. Jerome Tilak Singh of Trinidad and Tobago, and he reestablished an observance that was started before on November 19th in honor of his father and a moment of national unity. He envisioned a day not just to celebrate men's contributions, but to confront the serious issues they face, from suicide and family separation to health disparities and stigma. Today, International Men's Day is celebrated in over 36 countries. It's become a platform to promote gender balance, to support fathers and sons, and to remove unjust stigma often cast on masculinity. At ICMB, we see the need to go further. That's why we created Men's Equality Month, to complete the vision of gender equality for all. This afternoon, we have two powerful segments. We'll begin shortly with a press conference featuring 3 state representatives, each bringing a unique and necessary voice to this movement. Following two state representatives. Following the press conference, we'll host a national summit featuring 5 keynote speakers. Both segments broadcast live to viewers around the world. After these two events, we'll meet for dinner in the Capitol Cafe, Capitol Bistro. Did I say that right? Bistro. For dinner. And then we'll also hear from Ron Henry, a prominent advocate for men and boys, who will provide updates on the Violence Against Women Act. After that, we'll put our shirts on for a photo opportunity to commemorate this historic event. Look how much fun this group's having with their shirts. Okay, that'll be us partying later. Please stay for a photo op after dinner. Tomorrow, November 6th, we'll take our message to the heart of Congress. We'll meet with key lawmakers, both in the House and the Senate, to advocate for substantive policy changes. Our requests are clear and urgent. The establishment of a White House Commission on Men and Boys, a congressional hearing dedicated to programming, funding, and legislative support for men and boys, and reform the Violence Against Women Act, especially as it relates to parental alienation. Just yesterday, Mark Ludwig led a small army of dedicated advocates from across the country to promote shared parenting and Title IV-D reform. All of this work is made possible by a coalition of brave and determined advocates, people like you, who have refused to stay silent while men and boys suffer in the shadows. Your presence here is powerful. It sends a message that can no longer be ignored. Now, I have the honor of introducing someone who's done extraordinary work to shift the public conversation around masculinity and male dignity. Dr. Gilda Carl is a nationally recognized therapist, relationship strategist, and author of Real Men Don't Go Woke. Her message challenges the idea that masculinity is inherently toxic and instead calls for a new era of healthy, emotionally honest, and socially strong male leadership. She has been a guiding voice in helping men reclaim their identity in a world that too often silences them. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Gilda Carl, who will introduce our press conference speakers.
Want me to take your
You have to
place?
stand behind here, otherwise no one can see.
Oh, what a pity. Okay, is this going to destroy anything?
Nothing's going to destroy anything.
Okay. You want to announce?
No, leave that. Okay.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank everybody who is sitting here for being here. We owe all of
Gilda,
this.
they can't hear you.
Uh-oh, I have,
You're in Zoom. It's like a Zoom.
Okay.
presentation.
I can't freely walk around.
Only if you want anyone to hear you or see you online.
I'm used
We have
to
a streaming.
Okay. Okay, I want to thank everybody who is, here's the mic. I want to thank everybody who is here today. Thank you for giving up your time, and thank you for all your very hard work for this cause. I especially want to thank Dr. Ed Bartlett, who put this whole thing together. His press conferences are legendary. His press releases are incredible. He's been sending me out onto various media outlets, and I have proceeded to get into lots of trouble because a lot of people don't like what we have to say. Let me tell you how this all started. I can't walk. I'm an author, a relationship expert. I've been on national television for years and years. A speaker, a writer, and everything that has to do with interpersonal communications. I've advised people from Wall Street to Main Street, spent a lot of time on Wall Street, making sure that the bottom line was always reached. And it was always, every time I'm called into a company, it was always the result of some kind of interpersonal problem that existed in the company. And it was my job to take that apart, unfold that, and to train them in better communications where they can realize what their financial goals really are. So it's been a wonderful ride. And then I was writing, well, I wasn't prepared to write this last book that I wrote. I was writing for women because the publishers, the main publishers, and I've had books published by major publishers, but I've written for women because the publishers advised me that men don't read self-help books. And I said, well, they need something. And because I started diving into the research, I recognized that men are in tremendous need. That was before I learned as much as I've learned from this organization to find all these 12 areas where men have been falling short. So I've been using all the data that has been collected by so many really erudite people here with doctorates and who have done so much research to find out what is really going on. And I wrote one book that's called Don't Lie on Your Back for a Guy Who Doesn't Have Yours. And that was for women. And then as I realized, men couldn't have women's backs because they didn't have their own. And so I said, well, this is really very interesting. And I started writing a book, and it had a different title than the book title that we ended up with. And I was told by a very powerful agent in New York, because that's where I come from, that they will not publish anything that is anti-woke. And so I changed the title to include the word woke. And this is the book that I came up with. And I did it all on my own. I hired a particular publishing house that would work with me. I wanted this to look like a man's manual. This is not a self-help book. It is men's health book. And that's something that men do resonate with. So I wrote this book, and through this whole thing, I recognized that men's suicide rates have been going through the roof. Men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than are women. You add that to the lowering of testosterone, to the Y chromosome that is thinning out, to the depression, to the loneliness, to all of the things that we've been reading about. And of course, we can, as human beings, either act our anger out or act our anger in. The people who act anger out, are the toxics. The people who I write about in the book, because I use all examples of pop culture names, because I figured we don't even know who our legislators are. We know the names of pop culture figures. So P. Diddy is toxic. Harvey Weinstein is toxic. The things, that's what we're talking about. But a normal man walks out the door and he's automatically called toxic. And one man from Belgium who had just read this book said that he was so upset with being called toxic so often that he became non-binary. That's not a solution. Other men, and because I am on TikTok and I'm doing TikTok lives, I'm getting men in the streets, and they are camouflaged in terms of names. Zorro 123, I can't relate to, but they are talking to me. And I was telling Lisa at lunch actually that some troll came by and made some nasty comment about me. But being in the media for so many years, I'm used to it, whatever. And I wanted to know what they said, but I never got to, because one of the guys jumped in my defense. He said, she's on our side, leave her alone. So I have a new group of people protecting me, it seems now. So I'm really grateful for that. The book has made a lot of waves. People on social media have come to me and they say, oh no, woke doesn't mean what you think it means. Well, I got the definition of woke from the Urban Dictionary. Little did I know, just like Wikipedia, that anybody can go in and change the definition. And as soon as Hollywood came out and said, woke means we love everybody, then I had a barrage of people coming to me and insulting me, saying, oh no, it doesn't mean that. And my attitude is, fine. If you don't like woke, say, real men don't go spineless. Real men don't go voiceless. Real men speak up. And a PhD who was in another group that I'm in said, thank you so much for speaking up, because I was fired from my job for speaking up, and you're talking because I can't. And I figured, well, he has advanced education. He should know how to speak up. But apparently, the nasties on the other side are not thrilled with our opening our mouths. And the brilliant thing that Ed did was he put me here as spokesperson for the International Council for Men and Boys. And every time I started to do an interview, the interviewers would say, how'd they get you? Well, woman, how are you doing this? And I said, we are more affected by men's dysfunction than you realize. I mean, we know that women know this. I started with all these other books that I had been writing. I started on another kind of book, and I didn't know where this would take me. And when I changed the name to Real Men Don't Go Woke, I was pleased with the outcome. despite a lot of people not being too pleased with my voice out there on behalf of men and boys. Many, many years ago, I was in love with a man. I met him after he had been through a divorce, a very nasty divorce, and most are, and he had 2 children. And we would travel to another state to see the children. And his ex-wife, who I never met, all I knew were the children, and I wanted to provide as much support for them as possible. And all I knew is that we would fly to a destination. His ex-wife didn't even show up sometimes. And there was one time he was so upset. He was smoking cigarettes so badly and marching around. He was just destroyed. And I felt horrible. And of course, I could do nothing. I was just the innocent bystander. And I remember we were supposed to meet at McDonald's somewhere. And I just sat down by the side of the building where he couldn't see me because I didn't want to feed any more of his feeling distraught. But I sat down and I just started to cry. And I said, what am I doing here? How did I get involved in this? I was the innocent bystander. I didn't have anything to do with his divorce. I didn't have anything to do with raising the children. And yet I was involved. And what I'm hearing from a lot of these guys on TikTok is that they have no rights anymore about seeing their children. They have no rights when it comes to being falsely accused of stuff they didn't even do. Then I saw something in the news just recently where a woman is walking across the street. You may have seen this. Woman is walking across the street looking at her cell phone, and a car is coming about to hit her, and a guy reached out to grab her, and she filed suit against the guy for unwarranted touching. He may have saved her life. When does this end? Well, we are in a position to end this. And so I am grateful. I have made wonderful friends. You guys are just, I love you all. You're just terrific. And this is the first time I'm actually seeing you face to face because I've seen you all online. I didn't know how tall or short or anything. I didn't know anything. So I welcome you again, and we will have questions and answers to respond. And we have some very powerful men sitting here and 2 women. But we will get more and more and more women as time goes on, because we will be the role models that they need. So let me start the press conference by introducing first and foremost Jamie Ray Grad. He's from the Minnesota House of Representatives. This is his 2nd term of office. He was very active. He has been very active in the Boy Scouts of America. He went through the family court system, and he is sponsoring the fathership bill to remove barriers for fathers wanting to be involved in their kids' lives. Jamie Grad, I welcome you. Would you like him to stand here?
Stand, sit,
Yeah, I prepared water for you if you want.
Thank you very much. Stand, sit, we're right here. Right here. Okay.
And if you want
great.
this,
Thank you.
if you need this.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
That's sort of slim.
Oh.
That's safer.
This is probably a
Okay.
little safer, yes. I'll just make one correction. I'm from a couple of states further south. I'm from Missouri.
I didn't say Missouri. Okay.
Minnesota. Also
I
a good
am
state.
so sorry.
Also
Okay.
a good state. That starts with an M, which is a good state. Yes, Missouri, right there in the very center of the United States, right where Branson is. I'm just about 30 minutes north of Branson, the town of Ozark itself. So if you've heard of the Ozarks, we're smack dab in the middle of the heart of it. So yes, you can applaud. You can applaud. Ozark is probably the buckle of the Bible Belt. So it's a great place to have grown up. Great values, great people, good place to grow up. I am 10th generation of folks that grew up there, who have been born and raised there. Doesn't mean that I make a great legislator. It just means that I come from a long line of folks that care about where they come from. It is people that love where they are, and they take care of their own. And we put strong emphasis in our family, and we take strong emphasis in our children. So that right there in itself says that I do care about our generations below us. We do have to take care of our younger generations because we have to, what we leave them, they have to have something. Okay. Name means everything. Just the other night, we were up at me and Mark Ludwig were up at a meeting on the other side of Washington, D.C. And we ran across a gentleman named Reverend George, and his last name escapes me. And somebody asked him about a name. He is the third. You know, we've heard of people who are such and such the second or junior. Well, he was a third. You don't see many thirds anymore. And so somebody said, "What's it like being the third?" And he said, I was raised that being the third is very important. We have to take pride in our name, and we have to raise our children to respect the name, because when we have pride in our name and we're raised with the values and the pride, it creates worth within ourselves. And he's absolutely right. So when we're proud of where we're from, we're proud of our family, that's what we pass down to our children. What you were saying earlier, we have an epidemic going on. We have men that are no longer involved in our family. That is the separation of the values of the family. We no longer are passing anything down. Our children are now seeing that the family is disposable. That's the fight that we have to fight. We have to kick and scratch. We have to claw our way back to that. We have the epidemic. We have our generation coming up that not only don't know what they are anymore, but we have teen pregnancy issue. We have dropout issue. We have gun violence. We have drug abuse. We have suicide. We have all these issues that we hear in the news, we hear in the media. And the common denominator for every single one of them is they've grown up in households without a father. That is the epidemic that plagues us right now. That is the one that you see all across the world, not just our country, not just our local communities, but that is what we see all across our world. And I am convinced that if we focus not on the symptoms of the little issues we see in our communities, but we see the big picture being that we are letting the family dissolve. If we focus on the big picture and we start putting the things back together, if we start focusing on our children and the next generation and putting that back together, that we will see these other issues coming back into fruition. We will see our educational system come back into focus, because we'll have moms and dads that don't care about what their children are hearing and listening and reading. We will see our workforce come back together, because we will see people that will put pride back in their work. We will see employees put pride back in what they're doing. We'll see employers putting pride back in who they employ and how they take care of their employees, and on and on and on. So that's kind of what we're doing in this fathership bill that I've got in the state of Missouri, not Minnesota. We've got so many dads that have just thrown their hands up in the air and walked away. And I'm sure you've seen it in your areas as well. Fathers that have just given up because there are too many roadblocks, too many barriers, too many walls, doors closed. They've gone from seeing their children every day. They've literally brought them home from the hospital, raised them, kissed their foreheads every night. And then all of a sudden the judge says, you get 4 nights a week or 4 nights a month. That's it. Yeah, that's rough. That's impossible. That is just unfathomable. when you tell someone that you are responsible for this individual or these individuals. I have 4 children myself. I have 3 boys and a little girl. She's 24. She's my baby. And she's my youngest. That's a hard pill to swallow. Sorry. We have to make sure that these children have their fathers. There is so much that children get. God-given. God created us this way. Psychologically, physiologically, there are things that we get from moms. There are things that we get from dads. That's just the way we're made. You get down to the DNA, that's the way it is. There are things that we get from dad that we will never, ever get from mom. Mom can try all she can, and she does a great job most of the time. There are moms that will just do everything she can, and she does a great job. But she just can't do everything that she needs to do to get that thing that dad can give. And the same thing on the flip coin. There are dads that raise the children, and he can do everything he can, but he just can't give those things that mom can give. Kids are made that they need both parents. So that is the bill that we've got in Missouri, is to help alleviate, get rid of those barriers, give dad that avenue, give that avenue back to dad so that he can be that dad back to those kids. Because we've got a system right now that just blocks him out. And there are dads that desire, with everything they've got, to want to be in front of their kids. There are dads, unfortunately, that don't want that. We can't force dads. There are some dads that just don't want it. We can't force those dads, unfortunately. We can pray for them, obviously, but those dads that truly want to be back in front of their kids, we have to make a way. We have to. So that's what we've got going on in the state of Missouri. Last year was our first year that we filed it, and we made some great headway. We made it unanimously out of our Children and Family Committee, unanimously out of our Rules Committee, unanimously through our fiscal review. Got it onto the floor. We only had a few votes that voted no on the House floor. Got over to Senate, unanimous out of committee, their Rules Committee, and unfortunately we had a few other bigger bills that kind of roadblocked the Senate before the end of the year, so we were behind them. End of the year. This year we will get referred earlier in the year, so we will make it all the way through. So we are looking for some phenomenal good things. So we're going to get through this year. Count on it. So there we go. Any questions that we have? None.
What does the bill say?
Great, good question. Yes, I always forget about that. I'm so passionate about just what we do. Okay, so yes, what the bill is now, and so this is a template built off of a template. The state of Florida just had this grandiose plan that they saw this, because the state of Florida has a lot more people than the state of Missouri. We have 2 metroplexes. We have Kansas City and St. Louis, and we have some other larger metros. We have Springfield and Columbia and Joplin. Those are our other smaller metros. Of course, Florida has a lot more. So their population is much higher. They saw they have a lot more fatherlessness. So they just said, we're going to blitz this thing. So they came up with a bill that would create a line item in the budget. They're just going to pick a number out of the sky. They just picked a number. They had no formula. They had no rhyme or reason why they picked the number they picked. They just said, we're just going to put this amount of money into it. We're going to appropriate it. So we're just going to say it right into the bill. And we're going to say nonprofits and community groups all across the state can apply for a portion of those dollars. And they can use those dollars to, they can apply for them, and they can use those dollars to hire, train, and facilitate fathership engagement professionals. And those people are like caseworkers. And those people will get dads from referrals, whether it's from the court systems or whether it's from the community organizations, or dad himself who desires to be in front of their kids can come to these organizations and say, hey, I just want to be back in front of my kids. Can you guys help me? And they would put dad with one of those caseworkers, and they will build a one-on-one plan to help dad build a plan and help navigate those roadblocks, whether those roadblocks being himself, whether he's got legal issues. Maybe he's got himself in trouble and he needs to navigate the legal system, or maybe he just doesn't have the right amount of work experience, or maybe he needs a better job so he can afford child support. Maybe he doesn't have the right living place. Maybe he needs a better place to live so he can have his children live with him. Maybe he doesn't have a good relationship with mom. Maybe mom is that roadblock. Maybe we need to build that relationship up. Sometimes that relationship, or maybe he's got anger issues. There's a lot of different roadblocks. So that caseworker will work with him to make a plan so that he can get from point A to back in front of his kids. And they work that plan so that he can get where he needs to be. So that's the plan. Now, there's a second portion that the state of Florida put in, and I love it, but I know it makes the bill so much bigger. And I thought the state of Missouri, I'm not sure they could bite off all of that. So I took it in two parts. They put on also a portion in it that took the boys that age out of foster care, because those boys don't have a dad figure technically. And they have a whole nother portion. I thought, let's have that as 2.0. If I can get this portion, the dads first, then I'll have that next year, and I'll add that in there, because that's also a paramount portion. So I said that was a second section to come next, but that's a good portion as well. But yeah, I just took this just the fathership engagement portion first. So yes, sir.
So Missouri is one of the leaders in shared parenting. It's one of the 5 states that has a legal presumption.
I'm glad you recognize that. Yes.
I'm from the National Parents Organization, and Linda Reutzel in Missouri was one of the leaders in this, along with Mark Ledwig. So my question to you is, are the fathers in Missouri getting the word, and are the courts following this? Because of course there's discretion, the courts can deviate, is it really making an impact on the way children are parented when the parents are living separately?
Yes, it is. We do have a lot more shared parenting going on in the state of Missouri. As you said, it is discretionary. There are some dads that you do see more 45, 55. You do see some of that. But of course, that's because situation by situation. There's never going to be the perfect 50-50. There's never going to be that all 100% always. But yes, you're starting to see that. Ultimately, I think the mindset needed to be changed within the judges, of course, honestly. And I think you're seeing that across the board now. You're seeing that a lot now with the attorneys across the state. They're loving it. They really are. It's really made a big positive change. Our fathership organizations across the state are coming on board. They're growing. I know down in Southwest Missouri, we've got Man Up, which used to the former Man Up and Go. They branched out from Florida. They've now got a big footprint in the state of Missouri. Then you've got what's the other big one down there? You got the Fathership Project. You've got multiple ones up in the St. Louis area. You've got quite a few down in the Boot Heel. You've got just huge swaths of Missouri are just covered with fathership programs now. Yeah. Yes. Good question. Anyone else? I can keep talking. I'm a politician. I can talk till the cows come home. I just don't want to overstay my welcome.
No, you're just fine. We have another speaker.
Okay. We got the Jamie caucus here today.
Unless your name is Jamie, you did not get a slot on this program.
To the mic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
So the next Jamie is Jamie Flick from Pennsylvania, House of Representatives. He is still going through a nasty family court situation, which is why he ran for office. He wants change. He volunteers for Little League, the Little League World Series every year, attracting visitors from all over the world, and he intends to push this as far as he can as one of our United States representatives. Jamie, thank you so much.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you for being
Thanks. Larry, I will warn you, I'm a lot like the doctor. I like to move around. So
I'll bring you
I
back.
This is not going to be easy.
I'll bring you
for
back.
me. I will wander up and down.
I'm watching
When I-
on Zoom,
when
so
I
I'll
talk.
bring you back.
Thank you, Larry. Mark, thanks for organizing everything. And Doctor, thank you. And Representative Greg, thanks for having a great first name. I appreciate you. So I am the other Jamie. I'll tell you a little bit about Pennsylvania. It is probably of the 50 states the most purple, right? It all the presidential years always come down. So the House of Representatives, of which I'm a member, has 203. We're also full-time, and we're also highly paid, so a little different in that regard. 203 members in the House, of which I'm one of those members, 102 Democrats, 101 Republicans. You can't get more. The Senate is Republican-led, 27 to 23. The Governor Shapiro, is a Democrat. So to get a bill passed, even in Missouri, is not easy. Imagine in Pennsylvania, when you got to get 102 to 101, and then get it through the Senate on the different party, and then back to the governor, and hopefully it's not vetoed back to the Democrats. It's very, very difficult. I sit on, not surprisingly, the Children and Youth Committee and Human Services, because I'm very, very involved before I became a state rep with mental health and substance abuse. I owned a software company for 35 years. Prior to that, I was a farmer. So my background is not public speaking. It's milking cows and typing on a keyboard. So
You're doing just fine.
I'm sort of brand new to this as I'm learning. I have my chief of staff, Carrie Pauling, with me today. So we give Carrie a round of applause. She got me here. I just, a few weeks ago, I had a detached retina. So if I'm looking a little goofy and blinking a lot, I can only see out of one eye right now. So Carrie's my driver. But I'll give you a little bit of my background. 6 kids, all right, sort of in a non-traditional way. I really felt during my marriage of 17 years like I was father of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I could not have been involved as a father more. The obvious things of coaching Little League, coaching soccer, coaching football, coaching everything, being a band parent. Anybody know what Odyssey of the Mind is? That's a Odyssey of the Mind parent. Started that program in my town of Williamsport. I just could not. From feeding the kids bottles to changing diapers. My wife used to brag that she had a husband that was better at changing diapers than any man she'd ever met. And my favorite Mark Twain joke, I'll go out, is that politicians should be changed as often as diapers and for the same reason. Right?
So true.
So very, very true. So again, I'm a newbie, right? Got elected 2.5 years ago. And my path to election, unlike any other state rep in Harrisburg, who typically have a political science background or a legal background, I had never been to the state capitol. I had never been to a school board meeting. I'd never been to a township meeting at all. I raised my kids every day, every night, never missed an event, even a practice. So again, I could not have been more involved. So not surprisingly, because 51% of married couples in Pennsylvania get divorced. So it shouldn't be a shock when somebody gets divorced. So we got divorced. I just assumed I'd go to court and get 50-50 custody. We'd be week on, week off, whatever. Or hopefully we don't even have to go to court, which is the best thing. That didn't happen with my ex. We went to court, and in a mere matter of minutes, I'm told every other weekend. Like in minutes, it was devastating, absolutely devastating as a pro se litigant. So then I did what most men and women do. You lawyer up, you get who you can find the best lawyer with. And then that ensued in about a 2-year battle through 5 attorneys, just trying to get 50-50. During those 2 years, if you can imagine this, the court that pretty much said you're a lousy dad every other weekend. You're good enough for every other weekend. The exact same court swore me in as what's called a CASA, a court-appointed special advocate. Imagine that. So you get your kids every other weekend, but boy, Jamie, we really, really need you to care for these foster kids and advocate for these foster kids. Worse yet, the next year, I became legal guardian for 2 kids from Brooklyn, New York that I had through what's called the Fresh Air Fund, which is you live in the country, you take kids out of Brooklyn and they stay with you for a week or 2 weeks or a month or the whole summer. So I had 2 brothers from Brooklyn every summer for 10 years. I was also a big brother with other kids. I could not have been more involved with kids throughout the whole Northeast region of the United States. So the same court allowed me to adopt and become legal guardian to 2 inner city kids. The dad was a Crip. He had murdered 2 Bloods. So in the middle of the night, the mom said, you got to come up and get the kids. So I then didn't just have them in the summer, I adopted them. I became legal guardian. So I'm thinking, how is it possible that this judge is like, yep, you can be a legal guardian and you can be a court-appointed special advocate for these kids and you can coach every kid in the whole county and everything. But my God, you're not going to get your kids every other weekend. It was so stressful. It caused a severe stroke. So about 4 years ago, I had a severe stroke. It took me 6 months to learn to talk and walk again. And at that point, as I got back home after therapy, I said, I'm going to go visit my state rep. This is absolutely insane. So I went to my state rep, was not happy with his answer. He had been in there for 4 terms. And I said to him, I'm running against you. If you can't get me every other week, I'm running against you. So again, with zero political background, my campaign team was my 92-year-old former dad, my paramedic girlfriend, 0 endorsements. So I went up against the establishment. I ran as a Republican, but again, Pennsylvania as purple as you can get. So in my area, rural area, ran as a Republican, and long story short, won by 85 votes. So less than 1%. So against the whole that was even shocking to me, right? So I ended up in Harrisburg, and that's the reason I'm there, for the kids, 100% for the kids. So I immediately went to work, and soon, within weeks, found out, are you going to be surprised? There's corruption in politics. Did you not? Anybody know that? Raise your hand if you knew that. I didn't know that. I thought it'd be semi-fair, but especially Pennsylvania's ranked year in, year out, one of the top 5 corrupt. I think last year was 2nd, so thank you to Illinois for at least top of the list. But even the littlest things, again, going back to the 102 to 101, for my party, who's down 102, 101, a lot of state reps, especially on the hard right, say, I will never compromise with the Democrats. Well, we have to. We're down 102, 101. You better compromise with at least one of them and flip it 102, 101 the other way. So I started a caucus. So again, you have your different committees that you get assigned to. For me, Children and Youth, Human Services, Tourism and Economic Development, and Environmental. But I thought, I need to meet with the other team and get them involved in my fatherhood and the bills I want to run. So I started a caucus called Meet Me in the Middle. Right, pretty catchy name. And I invited both parties to a press conference and had them sign up. By the end of the day, 50 state reps, 28 Dems, 22 Republicans said, yeah, we can at least talk and maybe go out for a beer or go bowling and get to know your kid and your family situation. And I really got to know a lot of other dads on the other side of the aisle that are like, oh, I've had the same thing. That happened to me. I'm a state rep and that happened to me. Oh my gosh. So suddenly you feel in this room and like we felt last night, somebody else has experienced this. We're not alone. There are tens and tens of thousands of men and women that have gone through this, mostly men. So the Meet Me in the Middle was pretty cool. The day I had my press conference, and again, my background, farming computers, I get a phone call from Governor Shapiro's office. The governor would like to have dinner with you. I thought it was a college roommate. I'm like, all right, Frank, come on. No, he will have a car come for you. So that night I had dinner with Governor Shapiro. And he just wanted to thank me for the Meet Me in the Middle caucus, so that we have to be bipartisan. We need each other, right? He needs me to sign legislation. I need him not to veto my legislation. So then my next trip was to Missouri. That was weeks after I got elected to meet Mark Ludwig and also to meet Jamie. So I flew out there because that bill had just got passed. So I'm like, oh my God, if they can do it in Missouri, no pun intended, show me, right? So thank you. Appreciate that. So I took all that information back and I met probably 40 or 50 dads in Missouri, many from Pennsylvania, that had flew to Missouri just to meet me. And so I get back and I start working on my 50-50 bill, copying ideas from Texas, from anywhere, especially from, I'd say, West Virginia, Arkansas, Florida, and Missouri, where it had passed at that time. Put it together, and about 6 months ago, and if you run a bill, and it fails, you can't reintroduce it for another term, another 2 years. So at 102, 101, you can't afford one person that told you yes not to come through, because after you think you have a yes, the politics begin. Don't vote for Flick's bill or I'm going to pull funding from your district. It's a really dirty game. So I had an opportunity a few months ago not to run it as a bill, but I waited for a Democrat to introduce a different custody bill and I hooked it on as an amendment. If an amendment fails, you can run it again the next day. So I thought, ooh, this is a good idea. Run it as an amendment. I definitely was not prepared. And then suddenly the Speaker of the House, who controls the entire agenda, called me up on the House floor, a little nervous. So I got to talk about my bill and my experience for 5 minutes. And I had met with 2 Democrats the night before when I thought it was going to run the day before. And they said, Jamie, we're going to give you the yeses. So suddenly I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I get those 2 yeses, I'm going to get this moved to the Senate. And there's a big board of the 203 yeses and nos, red and green, yes and no. And sure enough, the 2 Dems give me the green button. I'm like, this is going to the Senate. I'm watching it light up, and at the end, 4 Republicans voted against me, my own party, for various reasons. One is going through a divorce. Her husband yesterday ran to be a family court judge, and she just did not want him, right, to not get 50-50 or to get 50-50 of the kids. 2 were very, very hard right, Freedom Caucus. No offense to anybody in here that's the Freedom Caucus, but we all have to work together. Whether we're moderates like me or Freedom Caucus, we have to work together. 2 minutes to go, great. So that bill came so close, it sort of scared the Pennsylvania Bar Association. They thought it had no chance whatsoever. So suddenly, I've become an ally with them. It's a love-hate relationship. We need the bar because they're paying a lot of the state reps, right? They're paying them lots of money. There is no limit to the money you can collect in Pennsylvania. If you go up to New Hampshire, it's a few $100s that you can collect. And you could give me $1 trillion to run for office. So it's very, very, I will say again, it's very, very corrupt. So I took a step backward and I thought, let's pass something. Let's get some more momentum going. So about 3 months ago, I ran a bill that narrowed the number of factors that judges use to decide who gets the kids from 19 down to 12. Got rid of some ambiguity, made it simpler. And then my amendment to that bill said for pro se litigants, the judge, anytime there's a modification to custody, the judge has to hand both parties the bill so that they, or the 12 factors, so they at least know what the 12 factors. So Governor Shapiro signed that, it passed. So my tiny little bill got through. And then just yesterday was announced something I co-sponsored, deployment. I'm the father of 2 military kids. My dad military, my brother-in-law was killed in Iraq. Very, very military veteran family. This bill, again, just went into law, states that if you are deployed, there can be no change whatsoever, no modification. You can't come home and your wife moved down the street with the kids. So a very powerful bill. Thrilled to have that bill pass. So we have a lot of momentum going. I could talk for the next 20 minutes easily, but I'm going to stick around for a little bit. So thank you very much for having me. Questions? Please, good questions. Karen.
Will you talk about the hearing that's upcoming in Harrisburg?
Thank you. So 2 weeks from yesterday, I'm going to have a hearing at the Capitol in Harrisburg, and we have some very, very powerful testifiers. One is the past president of the Pennsylvania Trial Lawyers Association that was a no, and then he got divorced, and he couldn't get the president of the Pennsylvania Trial Lawyers could not get 50-50. He's going to speak. A former, and I want it to be very, very nonpartisan, right? So I have a former Democrat House of Representatives to speak, who's a member of the Black Caucus. Our Black Caucus is very, very strong in Pennsylvania. I'm sort of an honorary member. I have two African-American children, so I attend all of the Black Caucus events. And then our third testifier is Miss Sneed, Teresa Sneed from Florida. So that is the 18th of November, less than 2 weeks away. If you're bored, come. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You know, we don't talk about what happens to these men who are under so much stress. I never see that talked about in the news, written about in the news. Nobody's talking about that. The man I had been engaged to landed in the hospital with quadruple bypass surgery from all of his angst. Last night I spoke to somebody who landed in the hospital from his angst. And now you just heard about somebody, Jamie, who ended up with a stroke from his angst. And nowhere has this been talked about men's internalization of all the upset that they have gone through. Yes, we're trying to change laws. Yes, we're trying to change the mindsets. But the ability to be a real father is so tremendous, and nobody is really covering this in the media. I started my career as a teacher in the South Bronx, and occasionally I select a kid or another kid or whatever to take home and give some additional activities to. I was married at the time, and all of a sudden, about 2 years ago, I heard from one of these children. It was a boy from the South Bronx, and he had already graduated from college. He had already finished his military service. He was getting an MBA, and he reached out to me, and that's thanks to social media. And he said, if not for the fact that you and your husband at the time had reached out to me to take me fishing, one event, I would have remained in the South Bronx, and I might have been dead by now, like a lot of these other people I went to school with. One role model. What you are doing, Jamie, is incredible, having raised kids from the inner city. And that's all that I knew for many years teaching. So I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank the presenters. And I want to thank every single one of you who is not being showcased and yet who feels the angst. We're here for you. So thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
I have good news for Mark Ludwig. We're running ahead of schedule. You have some extra time, sir. Okay? If you would, you're going to, please. You'll still have that extra time. You'll still, Mark, I'll talk to you in the back. You'll still have that extra time.
I do want to recognize State Senator Steve Tarvin from Georgia. Where are you, Steve? Here he is.
Don't put me in the.
I know. He doesn't want to be in the spotlight, but I want to thank him for his participation with all of us. So thank you again, Steve. Okay, Mark, you're up.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I didn't realize I was going to get this.
Bonus.
Yeah, I do appreciate everybody in here. Appreciate the representatives from across the country for coming in. I decided to highlight some of you heard about what all happened last night. It was hands down, I believe it was the single most important event we've ever had in the shared parenting community. We had a private reception at the Capitol Hill Club, which was really needed to try and elevate our cause in the eyes of legislators. I mean, if you have a meeting like a VFW hall with a bunch of folding chairs that crank, it just doesn't give the same impression. I always call the Capitol Hill Club the Mar-a-Lago of DC. It's a very pricey private club. For a membership, Ed Martin, some of you know, with the Department of Justice, that reports directly to Pam Bondi. He's a friend of mine, so we used his membership. We had 3 members of the U.S. Congress there, even with a shutdown. A buddy of mine, I'm supposed to move. I didn't know there's a camera there. But we had Congressman Andy Biggs from Arizona has been a good friend of mine for I don't know how long now. We met at a dinner with President Trump years ago. His wife, Cindy. He flew in from Arizona just for last night. He is a strong supporter of ours. He talked about last night. He said, I haven't seen my grandkids in 5 years because of a custody court case. And he said, I'm a member of U.S. Congress. If I can't see my grandkids, what does everybody else in this country do? Eric Burleson, who ironically lives in Representative Jamie Gregg's district, he flew in from Missouri. And then we had Congressman Nick, I always mispronounce his last name, from the only representative. Alaska only has one state rep, one U.S. congressman. So he came in too. I had a couple of friends of mine from the White House. We did have Tim, the executive director from Focus on the Family, that came in. Matter of fact, I got a very nice email from him this morning saying that they'd like to fly me out to Colorado Springs and have some meetings with them about doing some collaborations. We had the co-founder of the Museum of the Bible that was there, and probably about 8 or 10 other pretty neat influencers. Bob McEwen, who a lot of you have probably seen on TV. He runs the Council for National Policy. He was there, gave a great talk from a personal standpoint about how this issue affects him. But it was just really neat. Representative Gregg and I were over today at Senator Schmidt's office, and then we met with Senator Husted from Ohio just now. And they were talking about, they were like, oh, we heard about your event. Congratulations. So the good news is the chatter's getting out there. And that's what we need, is we need our issue being talked about. Because if anybody's been up on the Hill, the overwhelming majority of legislators, their offices, they have no clue what we're doing. I spent the day yesterday with George Peacecore from NPO. And I love that too, is NPO, and I think we do a great job of collaborating. I'm more of a culture guy, a networking guy. I'm telling you, if we get a chance to hear George talk at any point today, this guy is a genius policy guy. And I think it's like peanut butter and jelly. I mean, we just had a great time yesterday going around. George, he can't be here now because he's meeting with the Democrat caucus leader Congressman Aguilar, and they had invited me, and I was like, to be honest, you want him instead of me, so I came over here instead. But we had some great meetings, but the overwhelming majority of members of Congress have no clue what Title 4D is, what the challenges are. So we have a strategy in place. Title 4D is going to take a minimum of 2 to 3 years. I don't know if anybody notices, but in Congress, it's kind of hard to pass a bill these days. Kind of hard to get them to show up. So we're not going to pass it this year or next year. It's going to be a 2 to 3 year period. So what you need to do is you need to apply pressure by an executive order from the White House and a regulatory change from the department or from HHS. So we're very fortunate. Missouri, we call the White House the Missouri Annex because we have 13 friends of ours from Missouri that work in the White House right now. And the new director of family policy that is going to be announced once the shutdown is over has been a very good friend. He was an intern for Senator Roy Blunt. I met him on his first day of being an intern. And but he's moving over. President Trump specifically asked him to be the family policy director. So we are going to have like the inn of the inn in the White House coming next week, maybe tomorrow. I don't know. We'll see. But so what we're going to try and do is work out an executive order and a regulatory change. But you've got to make sure that all three are in sync, because members of Congress always ask, what does HHS think about this? So if HHS hasn't bought into the changes we've done, we're messing everything up. So we've got a big strategy in place. I'm working quite a bit with Don Hubin and George. They're the policy experts. And then we're bouncing ideas off. So we'll meet with George and Don and Brian, by the way, too, and then come up with some ideas. What do we want to propose? Then we sort of test the waters. Hey, what do you think of this? What do you think of this? Then we come back and regroup. Okay, they didn't like this part. We need to reword this. So it's a long process, but we are going to be, I'm bringing people up 3 times a year. I do ask that people try and collaborate as a group. This was my 18th trip to DC in preparation for this. I've had 185 meetings between the White House, HHS, and on the Hill over the last couple of years in preparation. This is a big strategy that we have. So you're welcome to come up, but I'm bringing people up 3 times a year. I had 45 people there yesterday. But we're coming up in February, in June or July, and in November. I am going to be doing more receptions at the Capitol Hill Club, so if you're interested, I think the next one's probably going to be a lot bigger than this one based on the chatter that went out. So I'll definitely let you know. Don, I definitely want to make sure it's a date that you can make it.
Can I throw a question out?
Yeah.
Since we have a couple minutes. One thing with the Title 4D, of course, we're talking about Washington, D.C., but when it gets to the bottom level, it's at your county. So in my county, I've been meeting with the county commissioners who have never even heard of it, right? They get the money, but then the court takes it and uses it. One of the things is for fatherhood programs. I talked to Lincoln last evening and Robert last evening, and for George and Ron, I would say, look into that. Go to your county that you live in, whether it's Ohio, Pennsylvania, Missouri, wherever, and say, where's the Title 4D money? It's going. If dads are so bad, let's have a dad's program, and maybe if they pass the program, then you can give them more custody. So
well, that's one thing we're looking into with NPO, because right now there's only $10 million of the whole program that's spent on programs like that. So one thing we're looking into is how to expand that. But another thing we're looking into is potentially doing some kind of an audit or accounting of where some of the money is going to. But yeah, Don is pretty much my policy expert. So if anybody has any input on policies, check with Don. Like I said, my role is this, and I say it's just like a baseball team. You don't want everybody running out to the pitcher's mound. You need somebody in right field and left field. My niche is the culture, understanding how these are. It's pretty, as you know, in Pennsylvania. You know, there's some Republicans that won't talk to other Republicans. There's some Democrats who won't talk to. The culture up here in D.C. is even 10 times worse than that. So you got to know which names to mention around other people, because you mention the wrong name, you just lost yourself 3 votes. So my specialty is understanding the culture up here. And then Don and George are my policy guys. So if you have any policy ideas, suggestions, please get a hold of Don. Don and I work together, and I sort of tell him, hey, this is who I meet with, and then we sort of tweak the strategy.
Thank you.
Okay, or do you want me to dance or something, Larry?
No, we're good.
Because
No,
are we
good.
on time, or I guess we are headed. So
That's
does anybody
all right.
else have another question, though?
As far as what you spoke to with Health and Human Services, why is there that level of control? And why isn't there transparency and accountability to explain, their function with again, interference in families to that extent? They've got to have better accountability and better transparency.
Well, and part of it is a bureaucratic problem. The Department of HHS has just bloated and bloated and bloated and grown so much I talked to my buddy Andrew. Andrew is the interim director of our issues, basically. He reports directly to Secretary Kennedy. And he's told me, he's like, Mark, Trump appointed me, but he said, I have 300 to 400 managers underneath me that their mission and their goal is to hide and distract and keep anything from me. So I don't know what's going on for the next 4 years.
Doge helping you?
A little bit. We have had some meetings with the Doge team. I think you may have heard. I met with the Doge team in February, and they are doing some of you may have heard the report, and I believe it was the Wall Street Journal that talked about that they're looking to incomes of people on child support. That was one reason they were looking into that. But yeah, you're right. There's a massive accountability problem. Now, I do know they're working on trying to change that. I know during the shutdown, Trump laid off about 1,000 employees at HHS. So he's working on fixing the system, but there is a lot more to go at HHS. Now, we do have a new director. He was just confirmed. He came from Idaho, Andrew Grattison. He's going to replace my friend when my friend moves over to the White House, and he'll be the official director. So at some point, Don and George and I are going to come back to D.C., but during the shutdown, they're on a skeleton crew. They can't. Matter of fact, the new guy isn't even starting yet. So sometime in the next month or so, I won't bring the whole team up for that. It'll probably be just George and Don and I, but we're going to be meeting with HHS and the White House sometime in the next month or so. But good question. Any other? All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you. And like I say, policy questions, Don, strategy meetings.
Everyone bear with me for one quick second before I introduce Dr. Bartlett and Dr. Warren Farrell. I just have to set the camera because I muted it so there wouldn't be any ambient noise, and we're going to have to, everyone in the room is going to have to listen as close as they can as I crank up the speaker so we'll be able to hear Dr. Farrell. And now I'm pulling up the PowerPoint presentation that our staff here at Hilton helped us get. And here we go. And slideshow. Play from start. I'd like to introduce our next two presenters. We have our president, our founder of the International Council for Men and Boys, Dr. Ed Bartlett. He is going to co-present with a man who needs no introduction, kind of the father of the fathers rights movement, Dr. Warren Farrell, and author of The Boy Crisis. And he is working on a part 2 of that book, The Men Crisis. But I'll give him an opportunity to share, both of them the opportunity to share any additional information that they want. Please welcome Dr. Edward Bartlett and Dr. Warren Farrell.
Great. And give us like a 3-minute warning, would you?
Yes.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Hey, great to be here. Good to see everybody. And thank you for our previous presenters who were truly inspiring. Thank you so much for coming here to Washington, D.C. and sharing your stories. Now, some of you may have noticed that I'm wearing a rather odd clothing for a presenter. The T-shirt says gender equality for men, and I will explain the reason I'm wearing this in a few minutes, but I will say it does relate to the topic of the United Nations and talking about the global perspective. The global perspective clearly, increasingly, is influencing the policies and the public perceptions that we're talking about very much today. And so the way we're going to do this is Warren Farrell is going to go first and talk about his upcoming book. Warren, are you with us?
I am. Can you hear me?
We certainly can. So Warren, I'm going to turn it over to you to share about your upcoming book and talk about why we need an international perspective on these issues, and then I'll pick up where you leave off. Welcome, Warren Farrell.
Thank you. The book I'm working on now is called The Man Crisis, and it's a follow-up of The Boy Crisis, obviously. And it's sort of tied in also to the book I just finished, which is called Role Mate to Soul Mate. And one of the reasons I've been for the last 30 years working on 7 different ways of getting men and women to overcome the barriers that they have to effective communication. And one of those barriers was the inability to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive. And I found that to be almost a universal problem among all human beings. And so I realized that if I could get people to be able to handle personal criticism without becoming defensive, they would be less likely to divorce. And if they're less likely to divorce, there's less likely for the father to be left out of the equation. And if there's less likely for the father, if there's less likelihood of the father being left out of the equation, there's less likelihood of having a boy crisis, because the boy crisis's single most important contributor is the inability of the lack of father involvement in the family. Almost a very high percentage of your suicides come from boys without dads. A great deal of the drug overdoses, the deaths of despair, the dropping out of high school, the failures to launch, the living in parents' basements after college or after high school, being unemployed. In the boy crisis book, I have an appendix which lists the 55 major connections between dad deprivation and the boy crisis. I don't call it fatherlessness, because there's nobody without a father, but there are people who are dad deprived, and that really is especially challenging for boys who grow up in mother-only homes, and then they go to elementary schools where there's mostly females teachers, and the boy has no solid male involved role model, and so is therefore these boys are much more vulnerable to being told that they can join a gang and have a family and have somebody that really cares for them. And then as they get older, they're much more likely to be to not do well financially, and therefore be much more likely to be willing to do something like deal in drugs to get quick money. And so we have a whole series of problems like that. But I promised Ed that I would go through some of the problems around the world and that he has discussed, and then I would add some perspective on that in the areas of health and education and false allegations and shared parenting. So Ed, I will leave it to you from there.
Okay, thank you, Warren. And do you want to share any details about you listed 3 or 4 or 5 issues. Do you want to say just a little bit about those areas, or should we wait till we see your book when it comes out?
No, that's fine. In the education area, you had done a really good job looking at around the world problems with education. In your document on the UN has become beholden to feminist ideology. And one of the things I was adding when we were talking about that before was the OECD study of that worldwide, in the 53 largest developed nations, boys fall behind girls in almost every academic subject. The 2 that they fall behind girls on are very important: reading and writing, because reading and writing are the 2 academic subjects that are the biggest predictors of success and failure in life. Notice I said academic subjects. The biggest predictor of success and failure in life is the lack of postponed gratification. And the lack of postponed gratification is one of the things that is problematic for boys who do not have dad-involved fathers. And number 2 is health.
Warren,
Yes.
let me suggest this, Warren. So why don't I go through my various slides, and you jump in to share, just like you just did, on any of these issues that you would care to jump in on and share your additional perspectives. Can we do it that way?
That sounds perfect.
All right, excellent. Okay, so to tell you a bit about myself. So I'm honored and delighted to be married to a wonderful woman from Peru, and I'd like to introduce my wife, Laura Leon, in the back seat. I'm not sure she's able to hear me or not, but I want to just give a shout out.
she's meeting George.
Okay, so anyway, Laura's tied up, and I'll add that Laura's from Peru, and God has taken me to Peru 8 times over my life, and I do speak Spanish, so that informed my perspectives a little bit on the United Nations and how is the United Nations doing in addressing the issues of different parts of the world. So the United Nations goes all the way back to 1948, and one of the key founding documents of the United Nations is called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which you can see in front of you on the screen. And if you look at Article 2, it talks specifically about the importance of avoiding any distinction of factors such as race, color, sex, language, and others. So sex discrimination has been prohibited in the founding document of the United Nations, the Declaration of Human Rights. So things went along reasonably well until 2010. 2010 was the year that the UN Women was founded, and UN Women proclaims it has 2 objectives. Objective number 1 is to work for gender equality. Objective number 2 is to work for the empowerment of women. Okay. Now, as I'm going to explain in a minute, they do quite a good job on the empowerment side, but maybe not as good a job on the gender equality, and I'll explain why. So a lot of the focus right now in the United Nations, and by the way, I'll add that we've actually visited UN missions. We visited about 25 UN missions from about 25 countries. We've met with ambassadors, we've met with staffers. So we've gotten this information, part of it from the horse's mouth. So right now, a lot of the focus and a lot of the work of the United Nations is focused on what's called the SDGs, which stands for Sustainable Development Goals. And there are 24 SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals. And number 5 is, no surprise, gender equality. And as you can see, look at their explanation. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. All right. So that gives you a perspective right there. And again, Warren, don't hesitate to jump in to share your thoughts as I go forward on this. So the question that we have to ask is, what about gender equality for men?
Yep.
That's the question we need to ask. And that's the question we have asked in our 25 meetings with the UN missions. What about gender equality for men? And as Larry DeMarco demonstrated in his initial presentation, there are some very real issues about gender equality for men. It's just not 1 or 2 things. It's across the board. So we now know that men and women are lagging in 12 areas. 3 years ago, we didn't really know that, but we started looking at the data, looking at the information from the World Bank, World Health Organization, and we realized there was a pattern here. It wasn't just 1 or 2 areas. And some people would go so far as to say, if there really are 12 areas of male disparity, whatever happened to the feared patriarchy?
Yeah.
Right? Maybe it turns out there is no patriarchy, because if there was, they are doing a pretty poor job of helping men and boys dealing with these 12 areas of disparity. So I realize I digressed a little bit with that comment, but I think it needs to be said. So I'm going to go fairly briefly through the 12. Larry has already done an excellent job, and Warren has just talked about the education piece. Warren, anything you wanted to add to the education issue?
No, I think that's good, given the amount of time that we have. I'll stop where I stopped.
All right. And so the second is, and sorry I skipped the slide here. My background is in healthcare. I have a PhD in public health, and so this is the area that most interests me. So across the board, in most countries, there's a 5-year lifespan gender gap, and you can see the countries. In Russia, it's a 11.6 year lifespan gender gap, and you can trade. Remember, it was 1991 when the Soviet Union fell apart. Guess what? We saw a dramatic increase in that lifespan gender gap beginning in 1991. So these broader societal developments have an impact on men and in their lives.
What I'll add there is that in 1920, there was a 1-year life expectancy gap between men and women. Today, in the United States, it's 5.3 years. And the main reason, one of the main reasons, is that there are fewer deaths in childbirth. We have to remember that 100 years ago also, people live today almost twice as long as they lived 100 years ago for all sorts of reasons. One of the reasons for the increase in the gender gap between men and women is that there are fewer deaths in childbirth. But another reason that we can really look at as men is this. Historically speaking, we've had social drives to make men disposable. That is, we worship men as heroes if they were willing to be disposable in war. They got more money if they were willing to be disposable in the workplace, and those hazardous jobs. And also train boys for that, the social drives of disposability in things like football in high school. So we use public money to support boys getting CTEs or beginning the process of developing CTEs from repeated hits on the head in football in high school. And we have things like the option of flag football, which requires almost no hitting of each other on the head. And we need to really examine the types of things that we do through public money and public education that lead to boys and getting love and appreciation from cheerleaders who, say first and 10, do it again, and are encouraging boys to be loved by being disposable. And so that's one of the ways we can address the gap in male-female life expectancy.
Thank you. Now going on to point number 3 is what is often referred to as the boy crisis. And I'm going to turn this back to you, Warren, because you wrote the book literally on the boy crisis.
Yes, and let's see, what you have there is your focus on this issue. Oh, yeah, all right. Okay, first of all, I think my next thing that we had talked about in our rehearsal for this was for me to comment on the false allegation issue. But the boy crisis is, I think if you were to look at the boy crisis book, and one of the things I have seen the best feedback on is the chapter 16, in which I talk about the 7 major differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting, and how to create from that checks and balance parenting. So dads are far more likely to do things like roughhousing. They're more likely to tease. They're more likely to encourage a certain amount of risk-taking. But very few dads realize or are able to say to moms that one of the reasons I want to do roughhousing with the children is because the more I roughhouse and create limitations to the roughhousing when the kids don't show consideration for the brothers and sisters with whom they're roughhousing, the more I do that, the more the children are likely to become empathetic. Now, I've never heard a dad say one of the reasons I want to roughhouse is because to increase the empathy of children, but that's the data there, that it does increase the empathy. It also increases something else called postponed gratification. So if a child knows that she or he is going to lose the roughhousing if they hurt their brother and sister, it not only makes them tune into their brothers and sisters' needs and feelings and fears, but also they'd like to push their brother and sister out of the way to win at the roughhousing immediately. But in order to get the continuation of the roughhousing, they have to consider their brothers and sisters' needs. And so they have to therefore postpone the immediate gratification of pushing their brother and sister aside to win at the roughhousing. So those are just two examples of one of the 7 major areas of the differences between dad-style parenting and mom-style parenting. And I find that a lot of the couples that I work with in my workshops find that when they understand the value of what dads do, they really are much more likely to see the importance of fathers not as a child wanting to roughhouse and have fun and be there for one more child to monitor, if you will, but rather a crucial player in the children's health and development, not only the boys but also the girls.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some of these. So I think you mentioned you'd like to say a little bit about the false allegations problem.
Yes, I think one of the things we can understand about false allegations is that China and Japan both have policies that if somebody makes a false allegation, that they receive not a slap on the wrist as they often do in the United States, but rather the same punishment as the person they're accusing of, who they're making an accusation about, would receive if that accusation were true. And they have found that has very much curtailed false allegations. We also have to look at the very minimal amount of due process that males are allowed in colleges and universities when they're accused of when they are accused of something. And so because of time, I'm not going to elaborate on that, but there's a fair amount in the Boy Crisis book on what to do to avert false allegations, especially in universities and especially among younger people.
Thank you. Now tell me, again, I don't want to dwell on each one of these 12. So Warren, tell me which one you'd like to comment on as we go through this.
Your shared parenting would be the next one that I think I could make some contribution.
Okay. Let's see here. Let's see. Did I skip it? Yes.
It should have been right shortly after.
Okay. Yeah. And I'll just mention. So the bars that you can see on the right side of the screen shows the percentage of parents, divorced parents, that received equal shared parenting in 37 different countries. Now, it's in small type there, but it's Sweden at the very top. But even in Sweden, I have to look very closely, but I believe it's 20%. Sweden, of course, is known as the gender equality capital of the world. If you go down to the United States, it's shown to be much lower. It's shown to be about 5%. So, Warren, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, in the Boy Crisis, when I did the research for that, I sort of looked at what I found were really what I call the 4 must-dos if there must be a divorce. The ideal, of course, is to learn great communication systems so you don't get a divorce, so you really hear each other. But if you do have a divorce, the 4 must-dos are equal shared parenting, and this is based on research finding these things to be of extreme value. That neither parent should be the parents should have no more than 20 minutes drive time from one parent's home to the other. They also shouldn't live right next to each other for different reasons that I talk about in the Boy Crisis. Number 3, that there's no bad mouthing that the children can detect from mom to dad or dad to mom. And number 4 is that the parents participate in counseling at least once a month, not emergency-based counseling where people tend to argue for their perspective, but counseling where they have the opportunity to hear each other's perspective. And if those 4 things exist after divorce, the children are likely to do almost as well, not as well, but almost as well as they would in an intact family.
it is really impressive when you look at the research. All right, was there one other that you wanted to comment on, Warren, out of the remaining several?
Yes, the ones that we had talked about, my making comments on, were domestic violence, occupational death, and reproductive rights.
Okay, so let's go to domestic violence.
Yes, we often hear, among many of us in this group are familiar with the work of Strauss, Gellis, and Steinmetz, who in the 1970s found that men and women battered each other about equally on 7 different levels of violence. And so the good news is that many women, feminists especially, were totally opposed to that. The good news is that more than 200 people, mostly women and many of them feminists, have gone out to replicate, to prove that wrong. And they have all found that that was about right, that men and women are likely to be violent about equally at all levels of violence. There's 2 major exceptions to that. More recently, high school girls and boys that are dating, the girls are about 8 times more likely to hit and slap the boys as the boys are to hit and slap girls. But the most fascinating finding is that that while men are reported theoretically as being 50% more likely to kill a woman than vice versa, there was a complete lack of understanding of what was really happening there. Men and women kill differently. Men kill directly, and they usually kill themselves after they kill their wives, whereas women are almost like always will do contract killing. If they're wealthy, they'll hire a contract killer. If they're poor, they'll do a contract killing with a new boyfriend. And the common denominator is that the man always has a will. And but the tricky part of it is that therefore the contract killing is designed to not discover that the killing was a direct killing, because a will is not given if the killing is done purposely. That's called murder. And so the contract killing is designed so that nobody finds out that it was that the man was killed on purpose, not by mistake. So it might be driven off of a road or something like that. But here's the big issue. If there is a contract killing, then the FBI does not, that's planned by a woman, then the FBI does not call it a woman killing the man. It lists it in a separate category called contract killing. So there's thousands more contract killings than there are murders of women by men. But we have no idea exactly what percentage of those contract killings are by women of men purposely. But the potential is for it to be much larger than the males killing the females and the other way around. So the explanation for that is given in much greater depth in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say book.
Thank you. Let's go to homelessness now, which again, this is not just a problem in the United States for men. This is a global problem. We've looked at countries all around the world. This is a pattern that shamefully in every country we've looked, the majority of the homeless are male. Warren, what are your thoughts on that?
That is accurate, and sometimes the data is a little confusing. It's the street homeless that are way disproportionately male. So in San Francisco, in the area where I live, 85% of the street homeless are males, and so they're in a much greater, they're in a much more precarious position than the sheltered homeless.
Okay, then finally, I think you mentioned reproductive and adoptive rights. What are your thoughts about this issue?
Yes, one of the things that I think is really important is for us to have what I call men's ABC rights, and that's that before there is an abortion, that men have to be consulted by the woman who's planning an abortion, that she's planning an abortion, and that the man has the option to sign a contract saying, I will take care of this child legally and financially completely. That your job, that you and I both contributed to this embryo. And so we both have responsibilities here. And one responsibility is just not being responsible, having an abortion. But the other compromise between that is offering the man the opportunity to legally and financially take care of that child. The woman has an obligation, which is to bring that child to term, and the man has the obligation for the next 18, 21 years of that child's life. And so that seems like a very, very reasonable trade-off to provide an option to abortion versus no abortion. The second is that in this group in particular, we need to work on making sure there is a men's birth control pill. Nothing changed women's and lives and relationships between men and women more than the female birth control pill. There are many, many things that have been out for many years that have the potential for being used as a men's birth control pill. There is a number of reasons why it hasn't come out, but the reasons are not solid. And so being involved in the process of lobbying for men's birth control will give extremely great advantages to parity between men and women. And the third is that the father be able to be offered the opportunity to be involved in the child care at any point in that child's life, that the child should be equally involved with the father and the mother, and the father should have the right to that. So having a child without informing the father should be something that we as our group of men call for laws to be against children being able to be raised without the father being informed of the opportunity to equally raise that child. And so that's what I call men's ABC rights. The details for that in much greater depth are in the Women Can't Hear What Men Don't Say book.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're not going to do all 12, but this sort of gives you a flavor of both the scientific research and how it plays out in policies. So let's now turn to the United Nations and ask the question, well, what is the United Nations doing to address the 12 areas of male inequality? Because again, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is very clear. You can't discriminate on the basis of sex. And UN Women has said they believe strongly in gender equality. So to answer this question, we did in addition to the 25 visits we've paid to the UN missions, we also did an in-depth analysis of the website of the United Nations to get a very comprehensive understanding. And this is what we found out. So we looked in particular at the World Health Organization, the Human Rights Council, which is located in Geneva, Switzerland. And then we looked at some others as well. So let me tell you what we found out. So to summarize in just a few words, the somewhat good, the bad, and the very ugly. That's what we found out. So with the good, we found some definitely good things, and we want to give credit where credit is due. So with the World Health Organization, the European region office did a strategy on the health and well-being of men in Europe, and it's a very good document. I've reviewed it, so that's a commendable action. For International Men's Day, November 19th, the WHO has, on several occasions, several years, they have done social media posts commemorating and highlighting International Men's Day. So we, tip of the hat for that. So that's probably as far as we've found with the WHO. Now let's go to what we'll call the bad. While the UN has placed some attention on men's health and fatherhood, and there's been actually 3 documents that we found, but the other 10 areas of male disparity have been flatly ignored. So, and then with the very ugly, there is a widespread belief in the existence of the patriarchy. As I said a few minutes ago, I've come to the conclusion there is no such thing as the patriarchy. The patriarchy does not exist in 2025 in the world, certainly in the United States or in the world. That said, and I'll give you the examples in a minute. So second is the Human Rights Council, and the third is the new president of the General Assembly in New York City. So here goes. So this is the person on the right is Antonio Guterres. He's from Portugal, and this past March they had what's called this Commission on the Status of Women met in New York City. We were actually there, and you can talk, and these are his exact words. Women's rights are under siege, adding that the quote, the poison of patriarchy is back, and back with a vengeance. Well, we'll just chuckle over that one, all right? So that was obviously comes from the highest level person in the United Nations.
Ed?
Yeah, yes, Warren?
May I add something here?
Yes, we have 5 minutes left, so
Okay.
just to be aware, yes.
So when you hear friends use the word patriarchy, I find it helpful to say to them that the world was not controlled historically by a patriarchy. It was controlled by the need to survive. The need to survive was the dominating force. And in order to survive, neither of our parents and grandparents had rights. They had responsibilities and obligations. They didn't even think of a world of rights when they were talking about surviving together. And so that's what controlled the world. And that gives people an understanding of, oh yeah, my grandparents, they could barely survive. And that helps them have an alternative vision of what controlled people prior to the last 50, 60 years.
Right, okay. So let's now turn to one of the agencies. The United Nations has about 20 different agencies dealing with everything from International Labor Organization, World Health Organization, and others. So the Human Rights Council, unfortunately, is one of the most egregious violators of human rights of men. And in particular, there's a person who works there. Her name is Reem Asalem, and she has a title. It's called Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls. Well, that title right there gives you a hint right there of the bias. So in 2023, she wrote about a 50-page document titled Custody, Violence Against Women, and Violence Against Children, claiming that parental alienation is a, quote, unscientific pseudo-concept. All right? And I'm just going to mention one of the persons in this room today, Bill Burnett, wrote a response to this extremely biased and unscientific document that shows that it is based, parental alienation is based on science. It is not a pseudo concept. Well, she wasn't done. 2025, earlier this year, sex-based violence against women and girls makes very one-sided claims, again, only recognizing violence against women and girls, never, not once, recognizing the fact that men and boys also are victims of domestic violence on an equal basis. So that's the Human Rights Council. And then last, I'll mention the new president of the General Assembly. The General Assembly is that body that meets in New York City. They meet beginning in September for 1 or 2 months every year. And she was just elected as the new president, and her election was hailed as, at long last, we have a female who is the president of the General Assembly, as if this will be a milestone in the history of the General Assembly. and she is also she's from Germany, and she previously developed what's called feminist foreign policy. You can imagine what that's all about. So, in response, our partner organization, DAVIA, Domestic Abuse and Violence International Alliance, has encouraged DAVIA member organizations to contact their UN ambassadors, has held these meetings with the 25 missions, and has done a number of press releases. Some of them, I will add, are strongly worded, as they should be, given the gravity of the human rights violations that we are seeing from the Human Rights Council. Last, I'll end on an encouraging note, and this was just a couple months ago. A woman named Layeni, who is from Uganda, issued a press release saying, hey, if we're going to have a UN Women agency, isn't it only fair and logical that we have a UN Men agency? So she actually did this press release. You can see her picture there. So that concludes the presentation. You can see there's a lot going on. We cannot ignore the United Nations. We must pay attention to what they're doing, because it is having an impact on the United States and globally. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you and your team have done to bring up issues that are so crucial and important and so well documented. You have really made an enormous contribution to understanding boys and men's issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barrett. So our next speaker, I'm going to try and multitask and get this ready while I introduce him, deserves an award for the one who's traveled the furthest to get here, from the great country of Israel, Dr. Benjamin Bailey. Forgive me for this one's yours, and this one is. Just make sure that this is there, and you want it put here. Give me one there. Good. Thank you for your patience. Sorry about that.
Good, thank you, Larry. So good afternoon. Before I introduce myself and say a few words from where I'm coming from and to speak to you today about this topic, in a nutshell, I will say that men who live with an abusive female partner are a significant part, which is often overlooked, over a bigger phenomena of intimate partner violence. And it's a very difficult topic for most people to speak about, let alone be persuaded that this should be acknowledged. And therefore, it's an easy topic to ignore, and it has been ignored, as all of us in this room know, for already 50 years since the beginning of research in the field in the mid-70s. So in my next 25 minutes, I will do my best to work through this difficulty and hopefully make it clear that the longer that we'll keep on ignoring women's violence and abuse, the further that we'll remain from helping individuals and families in this field. And I come here today with two hats. I'm more than 10 years ago, I and a few other social workers have founded By Your Side. In Hebrew, it's Letzidchem. It's a non-government Israeli organization that we founded to help men in distress. And I'm today serving as the chairman of the board. And this is how we got to know Ed and Larry. And this is, thank you for inviting me to speak. My second hat is as an academic researcher. I'm a faculty member in the criminology department in the Western Galilee College in Upper Northern Israel. It's a peripheral college with about 50% students, both Jewish and 50% Arab. And this is where I'm coming. This is where I'm coming from. So it's a little over 28 years that I've been working as a clinical social worker. I started my work in working with abusive men in a very innovative hostel set up by the Israeli Welfare Ministry. And very often I would hear men saying to me, listen, Benny, it's okay that the judge has sent me here, and it's true that I've pushed her, but she threw her cell phone in my face before I pushed her. And so it's okay that I'm here, but why isn't she here, my wife, in the next room, also taking an anger management course or intervention? And it sounded like a solid question. And it took me some years and more of an experience to gain more confidence and dive into that world. So I've worked with men and women as perpetrators and as victims. My PhD was the first research, systematic research in Israel about women's abuse and violence in heterosexual relationships. I've also worked with children exposed to parental violence, and for already 15 years, I'm occasionally serving as a family court appointed expert in parent-child reunification cases in issues of contact refusal and parental alienation. And I also write danger assessments for men who are accused or suspected of behaving violently. So my fields of research for the last 15 years have been domestic violence, child maltreatment, and masculinity and fatherhood are topics that I've picked up along the way. And so when I came here, because all my career has been in Israel, I was thinking that is the Israeli case comparable to the U.S. case? And obviously, there are different local differences in culture, demographics, etc. But there are also strong different characteristics which make America, and the case of Israel, just as any and most other Western egalitarian countries, that both Israel and the U.S. are democratic societies. The gender equality is embedded in the institutions. There are strong women's organizations in Israel. And there are domestic violence laws for over 35 years. Israel was one of the first countries to pick up on these laws. There's mental health services, and it's a multicultural society, as the American society is. And this last point, meaning that there are always groups and communities and minorities that are more traditional and could say more patriarchal in their values and ways of life, and they're also very egalitarian and communities, minorities, and families in the country. So why is it so difficult to acknowledge women's violence and abuse? I think that when we think of femininity and masculinity and things like violence and dangerousness and vulnerability and victimization, it is almost natural and cognitively and emotionally to associate victimization and vulnerability with women, and violence and dangerousness with masculinity. And while women's victimization is easy for most people to envision and to believe, it is difficult for most people, unless they've encountered it personally, like people in this room have mentioned before, or through a friend or a son or a father. It is difficult. It's a difficult one to persuade people, and there's a lot of disbelief. Whilst women's victimization is always, and for a good reason, seen as a big deal and an alarming and not a funny issue and safe to support, Men's abuse is not a big deal. It's not alarming. I haven't come across more than 5 people in my career from the welfare or the police department who spoke to me about abusive men in an alarming way, and it's always something that men could bear, and there's no rush about it. Often it's funny, as we all know, and it's also risky to support. I could see the faces of people when I was telling them what the conference was about here in Washington and New York before I came here, and you could see what goes in people's minds when you just talk about men's equality, and there's always a suspicious kind of way, whether I'm a misogynist, or I'm a reactionist, or I'm a male that finds it difficult to reposition himself in modern times, etc. So, and while we know that for women who are victims of partner abuse, it's a shameful issue, but there's a wide legitimacy for them to speak about it. And for men, it's obviously always also shameful, but there's very limited legitimacy for men between them and themselves to acknowledge them and seeing themselves as victims. We know that from research, let alone speak about it to their friends, families, and even professionals. So it's just a counterintuitive story, and this is why our work is so important, and we should just keep on doing it like we all understand, hoping things will change. As for empirical research, one of the basics of empirical research is that you should keep it as clean as possible from ideology and from intuition. And it's amazing for me to realize how difficult it is to accept research findings in this field, because studies across cultures have shown that interpersonal violence isn't a gendered problem, but it's a human problem, definitely more so than a gendered problem. And though most violent behavior is executed by men, it's usually, as we all know, against men. And the case of domestic violence is a different story from all the other, from street violence or different areas of criminality. So it's a human problem, and many among both genders experience partner abuse. And it's important to realize. Help me out here, Larry.
Yeah. Just put the screen on that.
And it's not a competition, because often I hear, well, who gets murdered is women getting murdered, and we never hear about this. And if we'll acknowledge women's abuse, there's a budget issue, and we'll lose budgets for women's services. So it's true that the cake might or will be divided into more pieces, but these are all people and citizens and people who have a problem that we have to address. And it's not a zero-sum game. Talking about men's abuse doesn't rule out whatever we know about women suffering from abuse. And often I've written a book this last year, and it's called The Other Side of the Pain, Men Living with an Abusive Female Partner, which I hope to be done translating into for English readers by the early summer. And when I'm presenting the book in Israel to professionals or other places, I'm often asked, so what are you saying? The men's violence and women's violence is a similar and identical thing? Well, no, the answer is no, we all know that. But when you think of the spectrum of aggressive behavior, from the passive aggressive side to the most extreme side of severe violence and let alone murder, it's true that men are more murderous, they're more frightening, and they're more physically injurious. This is true. But most partner violence isn't an extreme. On the contrary, most of it is not even physical. It's mainly emotional and verbal, and it's bidirectional. And when there is physical violence, it's mostly moderate, of shoving and pulling, etc. And the extreme cases where men obviously are more dangerous, it's true, but that's not the big story. And when we concentrate on the very extreme, we're losing out on the masses who suffer from this phenomenon. Whereas the similarities are many, so the predictors of what would make a girl or a boy be aggressive or a victim in intimate relationships, the predictors are the same, and we know that it's basically exposure to adverse child experiences. Personality disorders are similar of people who abuse and or behave violently. The types of violence that both men and women use are different from the stereotype are pretty similar, and the motivations are similar. Socially, it should be said that, for instance, like women in the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in Israel or Arab women in Israel, when you come from a traditional community, the cultural dependency and the financial dependency obviously put women in greater risk. So we know that if you're financially independent, it's easier for you to walk out of abusive relationships. And for instance, for Orthodox religious women, if there's abusive husband, it's more difficult to stand out of these relationships than for a secular Jewish or woman. The reality of male and men victims, well, obviously, again, the similar is that many men report depression, anxiety, social withdrawal, and PTSD. These are the most common, most common outcomes of abusive relationships. What is unique for men is that the shame is deeper. We as boys were socialized for independence and winning and leading and being mentally resilient. So to be in a position where when I'm abused and or harassed by my wife is very shaming for men, and it's a deeper hole to come out of. And there's profound loneliness with men. We all know that because of what I've said before. Men don't share, and fathers in cases of separation and divorce are in higher risk for losing contact with their children. And so it's a whole issue of loneliness, and also the skills of creating social networks is an average difference between men and women. So men again find themselves in this context with confronting deeper loneliness. The issue of legislative abuse, and particularly false allegations, I won't go into it, but it's been discussed today. But from my experience, and in my book, for instance, the first chapter starts with 10 cases to explain to most people who cannot fully imagine what it's about. False allegations, according to my experience, is the hardest and toughest issue to come out of in such relations, because it takes time. Usually it's sexual allegations and physical allegations, and if my wife, God forbid, if we get into a nasty divorce and she'd argue or say that I've showered our daughters in a sexual way when they were 5, it would take me 4 to 5 years to clear my name, and I would not see my daughters for months, if not years. And I've came across dozens of cases like that. So false allegations is a big and tough one to stand up against, and we know that women file much more than men. And obviously, as we all know, limited services professionals very often don't know how to deal with men in distress. In general, psychological world is a feminine world, and many therapists do not know how to talk to men and speak to men, and more specifically in cases of abuse. And I will just say, maybe I'll go back to that, but maybe I'll start with this example. I've encountered a father who introduced himself to me a few months ago, and he's written a booklet about 5 meetings that he had in the welfare system about custody evaluation. And he calls it Rachel and You, and that's about 5 meetings that him and the mothers had with this social worker. And the third meeting, he decided to tell her about the abuse that he's experienced. And he writes the following. I came into the meeting anxious. Would she believe me, that social worker? Would she think I am manipulating, exaggerating, that it wasn't really violence, that it had nothing to do with our custody case? With shaking confidence, I told her how abusive my wife was over the years, and I expected her to ask questions, but Rachel didn't ask anything. Not a word, not a glance. She stayed silent, her face expressionless, writing briskly. When I realized that this was how it was going to be, something inside me cracked. And in that moment, it felt safer to end the story and the conversation as quickly as possible. This is a very, very common situation, I'm sure, here as in Israel, as in other places, that if you switch the gender and you think of a woman describing being abused by a father in a custody meetings and the custody evaluator not mentioning it, not asking it, and the ending chapter is that his abuse wasn't even mentioned in any report. So this is a very common reality and troubling one. So going back to 5 minutes. So the process of ignoring women's violence, because I think it's definitely a lose-lose situation. So when the diagnosis is partial, it's like going to a doctor and asking him, listen, please only look at my left side and don't look at my right side before you. Okay, it's illogical, and this is what happened. And women and men come to the welfare or before the court, and women's abuse is overlooked. And women have a sort of a legitimacy to go on with what how they behave, and men are supposedly re-educated, and that jeopardizes the healing of families, let alone children who the risk is unacknowledged when a mother is unregulated and abusive or violent, and this carries, we all know, severe consequences throughout their adulthood. It's also a counterproductive message that hinders the efforts to reduce family violence as a whole in the society, overlooking women's share of intimate violence. And the double standard in policy and the gender bias that we're all aware of in courts and welfare systems obviously weakens men's trust in government, and that's a big issue, and a risk for social cohesion and the belief of men in the institution. So, to conclude, about IPV, it's a human, not a gender problem. Women's abuse should be taken seriously and addressed equally apropos gender equality. The overlooking of women abuse, in my eyes, is sheer professional malpractice, and it's easy to understand that when we overlook men's abuse. So it's just, in my eyes, from what I've seen with children and with families and men, this is sheer malpractice, and this is how I think this should be framed. So for policy, welfare, and law enforcement systems, there's a room for a refreshed perspective that is based on research, academic research. To conclude, in the bigger picture, I just want to say that I find the denying of violence against men in the context of anti-male wins or a zeitgeist that arguments about patriarchy and male privileges, violence against women, sexual harassment, and traditional masculinity as toxic are very common, whereas in reality, most men are not that privileged. Most men are not CEOs who work in fancy offices and boss around people in floor 30th floor, but rather people who get up in the morning, usually before the children, and go into a cabin of a truck or the infrastructure, technical infrastructure of all our lives, and they're not that privileged. And women have privilege too. It was very apparent in Israel in the hostages cases when the elderly and children and women were the first to return and men were the last to return, and it was accepted by everyone as something that is just not 50-50, not equal, and for a good reason. So privileges go in both directions and are not an exclusive male issue. Most men, according to research, by far are not abusive and are not violent. And in traditional masculinities, there is often a lot of beneficial things. Again, with the case of the war in Israel, on October 7th, there were 350,000 men in a day putting uniform and twisting their life and becoming warriors, and that was functional and that was needed, and that had to do with the upbringing of boys and the ability for boys to be resilient and to dissociate, because you need to dissociate when you come from your regular life and suddenly you're a soldier and you're a warrior and you have to go into a war zone. You need to dissociate, and that's functional. So emotional dissociation is not, again, only a bad thing. Lastly, we all know that men value family, and most men are loyal and do a lot of sacrificing and want their wives and their children to be pleased and well off, and rather than, like Ed said, control them and be coercive, and as the patriarchal stories go. So to end, like IPV, gender equality is not a one-sided story. Gender equality and shifting social expectations are confusing for men, and many men find struggle and are lost. And it's not a funny thing, and it's not pathetic, but the world has changed dramatically in the last 50 years in the relationship between men and women. And women are more independent, they're more selective, and can have a full life with children, family, career, and everything without the permission of the man, and that's fine. But most men need to reposition, and a lot of men don't know how to do it, and they need guidance and help, and in a more compassionate way. So the state of American men in fatherless homes is known to you just as it's known to me, and men's well-being is a neglected field. So men are not okay, and what we teach boys is a big issue. I've asked this question often in Israel and in Germany when I was just there in sabbatical, because I have two girls, and the number of times that they come home and they said that they've had some kind of activity with girls' empowerment numerous times, and that's fantastic. And I always ask my friends who have boys, how do they empower the boys? What do they tell the boys to do instead of only what not to do? And they always look at me and perplexed. It's a good question, and it's a good question apparently in Germany and in Israel, and I've heard that in the States. So what's a desired pathway for men is under discussed. So in order to thrive, we'll understand we need a more compassionate rather than blameful gender discourse. Thank you very much. And any questions or something on later?
To make the point, I'm proud to announce that Dr. Bailey is a member of our sibling organization, the Domestic Abuse Violence International Alliance, TAVIA, so you can reach him with questions. He's also going to be present for the remainder of the conference. Our next guest is Dr. Don Huber. Don Huber, right? It's a doctor. Okay, and he is the chair of National Parents Organization, and I'm going to stall as I get up his presentation, which is right here. Now I just have to share it. Hold on, okay. Yeah, I'll put it up. Here, this is what you wanted to. And we just hit slideshow. I'm going to hit presenter. Did you say? Yeah, slide. Good. Click that if it doesn't go on its own. Okay, great.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Ed, for inviting me to this. I really appreciate it. I am going to be racing through a few slides so that we can focus on some of the more important issues that I want to talk about today. I created a slide about me, but I'm not going to say anything about this. I do want to correct one thing here, because Mark Ludwig described me as a policy expert on the Title IV-D program. And I just want to say that when I sound smart about the Title IV-D program, it's because I've listened to the real experts in National Parents Organization, and that's Brian Ulrich, who is our senior child support researcher, and George Peace Corps, who shares with me membership on the board of NGO.
While they're clapping, I forgot to say one thing. We have till the end of this presentation to give your selections for dinner. okay, and hand it back to,
Before 45.
yeah, before. So multitask, did you choose yours?
I did.
And you passed it up. Good. So everyone else, if you haven't, discreetly tiptoe back, and I'm sorry for interrupting.
Circle what you want to be.
Larry, is it possible to turn up the volume? Turn up.
There is, this is only, we don't have a mic, so they want you to talk louder. That's how we turn up the volume. I'm sorry. We don't have electronics. We thought we had a smaller room.
Okay, so non-electronic mic.
I will try to speak louder. I've never been asked to speak louder. I do want to say just a little bit about National Parents Organization. National Parents Organization is a large organization with chapters in more than 30 states, and we work with organizations in other states and in those more than 30 states to promote equal shared parenting when parents are living apart. I describe National Parents Organization as being child-focused and research-based, and what I mean by that is that we base our advocacy for shared parenting on the best research available about child well-being. Now we have, and this may not come as news to most people here, we have about 40 years of research that shows that children raised in equal shared parenting situations when the parents are living apart do about as well as children raised in intact marriages, and much better than children raised in sole custody arrangements. And Warren Farrell mentioned that earlier in today's presentation. On virtually every metric of child well-being, they do about as well. If you're interested in some of the research on this, you can go to NPO's research articles page at sharedparenting.org, and we have links to a lot of the terrific research on shared parenting. So shared parenting is best for kids. I'm here today, though, to talk about the Title IV-D program, the Federal Child Support Program. And the Federal Child Support Program was most manifestly not designed on the assumption of shared parenting. It was explicitly designed for cost recovery, to recover money that the federal government was spending on welfare benefits. And the idea was, the parents shouldn't be supporting these children, so we're going to go after those parents who aren't supporting their children. And not only was it not based on an assumption of shared parenting, it wasn't even based on an assumption of sole custody and visitor. It was based on the assumption that one of the parents was absent from the children's life, and that is explicit in the legislation that was enacted. It was also based on an implicit assumption that there was willful noncompliance with child support orders, and that led to the enactment of punitive measures and other enforcement measures. And the thought was that because it was willful noncompliance, those enforcement measures could be effective in getting support for children and in recovering funds for the federal government. This is just a brief touch on the history of the Title IV-D program. If you're interested in an in-depth study of it, I can't recommend anything better than the YouTube video by Molly Olson called The History of the Title IV-D Program, Child Support Secrets. She originally did this in 2005 and she updated it in 2019. It is a master class in the history of the Title IV-D program. So I said that it was based on the assumption of absent parents. Here's some of the language from the preamble of the original version from 1975. For the purpose of enforcing the support obligations owed by absent parents to their children and the spouse or former spouse with whom such children are living and locating absent parents. And slight digression for a personal note here. I remember vividly the day I came home from picking my kids up from school, making sure they did their homework, making dinner for them, reading to them to put them to bed, putting them to bed, and then I got a chance to open my mail. This is mail, something you might not know today. It actually comes on paper. Open my mail. It was from the Child Support Enforcement Agency, and the salutation was, "Dear absent parent." I'm not easily offended. I was terribly offended by that. In 1996, the Personal Responsibility and what's the whole title of this? I don't know, work, organization, whatever, PERORA Act, changed the language from absent parent to non-custodial parent. Better, less offensive perhaps, but of course it's not right either because custodial parents pay child support. I was a custodial parent, I paid child support. So it's not the right language either. The rhetoric, the legislative tools, and the program expansion of the 4D program clearly indicates that there's a presumption of widespread willful noncompliance with child support orders. There is the deadbeat dad trope, and if you want some examples, here are just a few. When Ronald Reagan signed the child support enforcement amendments, he said permitting individuals to ignore parental obligations, blah, blah, blah. He was ignoring the parental obligations. When Bill Clinton signed the Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act, he talked about fathers' neglect of supporting their children and them refusing to support their children. And the governor of my own state, Ohio, then a senator, DeWine, said that children should not have to suffer twice from the decisions of their parents to divorce, once when they decide to divorce, and again when one of the parents evades the financial responsibility to care for them. So clearly indicating willful evasion of these responsibilities. It was summed up in an article in Time magazine where the author said, if the 90s offered one villain by consensus, it's the deadbeat dad, that selfish fugitive condemned by liberals and conservatives alike for his irresponsible behavior and generous contributions to the cycle of welfare dependency. That's the perception that drove the Title 4D program. And of course, I mentioned already the 1998 Deadbeat Parents Act, Deadbeat Parents Punishment Act. So this presumption led to mandatory wage garnishment. We couldn't count on people to pay their obligations, credit reporting, and to increasingly severe punitive measures. So the assumption was that because it's widespread willful noncompliance, the punitive measures will be effective. And over the years, these punitive measures were increased to include mandatory garnishment of wages, suspension of driver's and professional licenses, fines, penalties, credit bureau reporting, liens, etc. I won't read the whole list here, but including jail time. Now, let's challenge some of these assumptions. The absent parent assumption. According to the Pew Research Center, in 1965, fathers engaged in direct child care on an average of 2.5 hours a week. By 2021, the average increased more than threefold to 8 hours per week. And 85% of fathers say that being a parent is the most or one of the most important aspects of who they are as a person. And with respect to parenting when parents are living apart, there is increasing evidence. We don't have reliable national statistics on this, but there's increasing evidence that more and more parents are doing shared parenting. The best research we know comes out of the Center for the Study of Research on Poverty in the University of Wisconsin. So increasingly, parents are doing shared parenting. What about the assumption that it's willful noncompliance? The vast majority of child support that's owed is owed by parents who are poor, unemployed, or severely underemployed. And it's limited financial means that results in these big backlogs of child support obligations. What about the success of the punitive measures? Well, a mistake in thinking that this is primarily a problem of willful noncompliance has led to increasingly extreme punitive measures. Those measures have not been successful, as I'll mention in a moment. So, okay, sorry. So here is a chart representing the amount of past due child support that's owed. And you can see it's gone up consistently over the years. You might look at this and say, well, it's flattening out. Maybe those punitive measures are being effective. But this chart shows you the percent of child support recipients who receive no support. And you can see it is virtually absolutely flat, about 24%, all the way up until the economic recession in 2009 when it spiked up. It went down a bit, and now it's back up again. So if these punitive measures of enforcing child support obligations were effective, we would expect this line to be going down. We would expect there to be fewer and fewer child support recipients who receive no child support. That has not happened. Those in the child support system have come to recognize this. So from a policy statement from the National Child Support Engagement Association, they said a significant portion of the nationwide arrearages are owed by parents with little or no reported income. And a terrific study that was done by Elaine Sorensen and colleagues in 2013 said this: emerging research then from the Urban Institute revealed that most state unpaid child support is owed by non-custodial parents earning less than $10,000 a year. is assigned to states to repay public assistance and not owed to families, and is old debt and is largely uncollectible. So the child support system that was based on mistaken assumptions here creates barriers to shared parenting. I said the focus of National Parents Organization is on promoting shared parenting. The 4D program creates barriers to shared parenting. The barriers, some of the barriers take this form. The absence of parenting time adjustments, and I'll say more about each of these in just a moment. The presence of unjustified thresholds for parenting time adjustments, and the presence of cliff effects in those parenting time adjustments. So let's take each of those very briefly together. The failure to include a parenting time adjustment. What a parenting time adjustment does is to divide the parents' combined obligation to support the children between the two children's homes when the children have two homes. And what you want to do is divide it based on expected child-related expenses in each of the homes. Right? The failure to include a parenting time adjustment leads to an imbalance in the financial resources in the two parents' homes. Now, those states that don't have any parenting time adjustment, in those states, a parent can go to court and ask the court to do a deviation from the guideline child support amounts. But deviations suffer four flaws. They take time to work through the court system. They're expensive because most parents can't handle them themselves. They have to employ a lawyer. That cuts out most of the low-income people. And they're unpredictable because by definition, they're deviations from the guidelines. And so courts can do radically different things in the same sorts of cases. And finally, and most importantly, they create conflict between the parents, because now one parent is going in and saying, I want to pay less than the child support guidelines say, and the other parent is obviously arguing against that. And anyone who has looked at divorced couples knows that they don't need additional reasons to fight. Now, in 2022, there were 9 states that had no parenting time adjustment. That changed. Now there are only 7 states that have no parenting time adjustment. That is progress. Well, one of those states will only take effect next year, in Georgia. And over the years, there has been an increase in the states that have parenting time adjustment. But having a parenting time adjustment isn't good enough. You have to have a well-designed parenting time adjustment. So the parenting time threshold is the point at which, usually measured in overnights, the parenting time adjustment kicks in. And parenting time adjustments that have unjustifiably high thresholds are barriers to shared parenting. In 2022, NPO did the first study of all of the states' child support guidelines, and we looked at their parenting time thresholds. And what we found, you can't read the names along the bottom, those are the 50 states. I direct you to our NPO shared parenting and child support report that's on our website. But what you can see is that the thresholds vary from the one overnight. California and Kentucky at that time had just one overnight for the threshold to come in, to states that required 50% of the time before there was any parenting time adjustment. The median threshold was 30%, 110 overnights. So those are unjustifiably high thresholds. And in every case where there's a threshold, there's also a cliff effect. Sometimes there are cliff effects in other cases, but in every case where there's a threshold, there's a cliff effect. The cliff effect refers to the situation where a minimal or insignificant difference in parenting time makes a huge difference in child support obligations. Cliff effects have no economic justification. There's nothing magical that happens between 110 overnights and 111 overnights in terms of the economics of raising a child. And cliff effects create unnecessary parental conflict. And again, parents divorcing don't need more reasons to fight. We did a study, the study we did in 2022, and we found that 9 states had cliff effects between 20% and 29%. And 17 states had cliff effects more than 30%. So one overnight made a difference of more than 30% in the child support. That is going to make parents fight over whether there should be 101, 110 overnights or 111 overnights, wherever the cliff is. So what about parental impoverishment? According to a 2019 study published by the Orange County, California Department of Child Support Services, they found that when child support is deducted from a non-custodial parent's income, their poverty rate increases from 43% to 72%. This is a government program that creates poverty.
the screen itself.
Hmm?
Use the clicker. When that happens, I don't know why it happens. This makes it go.
Okay.
For
Okay.
future reference.
Thanks. So here's a quote from the Center for American Progress. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, it estimates in 2022 more than 250,000 parents, primarily non-custodial parents and those living with them, were thrust into poverty by the child support system. And even stronger words here from the Center for American Progress, saying it's time to recognize that non-custodial parents have endured decades of institutional violence that have trapped them and therefore their children in a spiral of economic deprivation. The maldistribution of resources between the two parents' homes are not caused just by a bad parenting time adjustment. There are other factors that cause it. It's exacerbated by the fact that some states fail to include income in one of the parents' home that is actually in that parent's home. So some states, many states, ignore mandatory deductions from an obligor's income. So it could be union wages, union fees, or something like that. Money that's not actually in their household, they'll ignore that and treat it as if that money is in their household. And they will ignore the tax credits and other benefits that accrue to the recipient. So this is just an example, taking a hypothetical example, and the effects of existing tax policies on the actual disposable income in a custodial parent versus a non-custodial parent. And if you combine the head of household tax credit, the earned income credit, and the child tax credit under the scenario that we ran here, the custodial parent will receive $5,600 in benefits in their household. The non-custodial parent, 1/10 of that. There are also ways in which the child support system discriminates against obligor parents. It imposes on them obligations that it doesn't impose on any other parent. So support for post-secondary education can be ordered beyond the age of majority in numerous states. And despite the child, now adult child, being emancipated, these funds are paid directly to the person who previously had custody of the child. This violates equal protection provisions of the law because, except in cases of disability, married parents have no legal obligation to support beyond the age of majority or to provide support for post-secondary education. Child support recipients have no obligation to support an emancipated child or to provide support for post-secondary education. But nevertheless, child support obligations in at least 15 states can have a legal obligation to pay child support to the recipient parent for the post-secondary education of the now emancipated child. And I think this is largely driven by the thought that these non-custodial parents are trying to get out of any obligation. Most of us, of course, are happy to support our children through post-secondary education, but these child support obligors, they're the ne'er-do-wells who don't want to support their children. I think that ugly bias is showing itself here. So solutions. By statute or regulation, states should be mandated to develop child support guidelines that include parenting time adjustments that recognize both the fixed and variable child-related costs in both parents' homes, that treats any additional costs involved in child's dual residency, because there are duplicated expenses, duplicated bedrooms and things like that. It treats any additional costs as a responsibility of both of the parents. And I won't read the whole thing here, but it's gradual and linear, and it kicks in at day one. There are no cliff effects. Just what we were talking about earlier about the flaws in some of the parenting time adjustments. And at a situation where you have 50-50 parenting time and substantially equal incomes, there should be no child support transferred between the two parents. That doesn't mean children aren't supported. It means they're directly supported in each of their homes by that parent. What about parental impoverishment? Well, by statute or regulation, states should be mandated to develop guidelines that include a self-support reserve that prevents child support obligations from pushing parents into poverty. And it should be based on a regionally adjusted federal poverty level. We shouldn't have federal programs that impoverish people. And we should repeal the Bradley Amendment, which prohibits state courts from using discretion to retroactively modify child support, or at least allow some modifications in cases of hardship. There are many cases where it makes sense for a court to retroactively modify a child support. The Bradley Amendment, part of the get tough on these deadbeats, the Bradley Amendment doesn't allow courts to use their discretion to modify those. What about the disparity of resources for children? Well, again, by statute or by regulation, states should be mandated to develop child support guidelines that are based on the actual net disposable resources available in both households. So it should deduct from the obligor's income any mandatory expenses, taxes, FICA taxes, statutory deductions, etc., child support paid and other to other parents, mandatory deductions like union and professional dues. And it should add to the recipient parent's income any tax and other benefits received in that household, like other child and spousal support, child-related tax benefits, etc. What about the discriminatory obligations? Well, we should amend the Title 40 program to require that child support ends when the child reaches the age of 18, except in the cases of disability. Or at a minimum, the federal government should not be in the business of providing matching funds for the post-majority cases in those states that choose to order child support obligations beyond the age of majority. So in conclusion, I want to say I believe the Title 4D program was created with good intentions. I think the better of the two intentions is supporting children. Still a good intention to reduce the public expenditures. That's good. That's not quite as important in my book as supporting children. I think it was created with good intentions, but it was based on mistaken assumptions, flawed assumptions. And those assumptions were flawed right from the get-go, but they're changing. We have increasing cases of shared parenting, and the states are not keeping up with this in their child support laws. It's time for a child support reset. We need to rethink how we're doing child support so that we treat both the parents fairly and the children receive adequate financial resources in both the parents and both of the homes when the children have two homes, which we know is the best way to raise children when you're raising them living apart from one another. So I will put up some links here. If you're interested, you can contact us in any of these ways. And I'm happy to answer questions. I think I have 4 or 5 minutes here to answer questions you might have. And I will just reiterate what I said before. You throw me a tough policy question, and I'm going to turn to Brian Ulrich and George Peace Corps to give the answer. So, yes. And
thank you for doing all this great work. Not really a tough policy question, more like the analytical side. How much has there been analysis from your organization or any others that can kind of look at the quantification of the money that's been contributed, let's say, on a state-by-state basis, right? Because we've heard, like, for instance, there was the hearing in Illinois when they were trying to pass the equal shared parenting title, and the opposition said, you know, if this passes, this is going to cost us tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in funding. But is there something, as we try to take this to other organizations and spread the word, that we can kind of point a finger at, even if it's ballpark?
So I understand the question. I think I do. You correct me if I'm getting it wrong here. Let me just repeat it very briefly. It has to do with the federal funds that go to the states for child support. And sometimes legislators are concerned that we're going to lose federal funds because, you know, we're not collecting as much child support. A couple things to say about that. What the heck happened to the children's best interest? Something that dropped out of the picture. We have looked at these reimbursements, and some of the performance metrics create perverse incentives for having larger child support orders. Texas is the champion at recovering federal funds. They have a statute that tells the courts to make child support orders in a way that maximizes the return to the state from federal funds. And they do that very well. Now, I have a simple solution to this. It's one that I originally proposed tongue-in-cheek. I thought it was just a silly solution. But increasingly over the years, I thought, well, maybe this is what we need to do. Here's what you do. It doesn't make any sense, except it solves this problem. When you have a case of shared parenting, each parent has a child support obligation. This is true in any state that uses the income shares model. It's true on a moral basis in the states that use percent of obligor's income, because actually both parents have an obligation to support their children. Both parents have an obligation to support their children. If you have shared parenting, then order child support from mom to dad in her amount, order child support from dad to mom in his amount, and send it back back and forth, right? It's crazy to do that, but the state is suddenly collecting a whole lot more child support. But that's my maybe still tongue-in-cheek solution. But we have looked at this, and there are perverse incentives. Sorry.
On for Congress.
and one of the things we need to do is to rethink those performance metrics, because they have created perverse incentives. They're not directly focused on what's in the best interest of children.
So, can any statutes be passed in federal state about bringing morals back, like equality morals, basic, going back to basics, which will be, like maybe it's joke kind of question, but it's sarcastic, you know? Okay, so I love going back to basics. I'm a retired philosophy professor, and that's what we do. We do the fundamental principles here. The child support system is a very complex system with federal regulations, but the federal regulations, I've learned from Brian Ulrich, are very loose, and they allow states a great deal of leeway in what the states can do. So I think really what this is armchair, but I think what's happened is the federal government wanted to show they were getting tough on these deadbeat dads and whether they're going to pass this law, but they didn't really know what to do. So they sort of left it to the states to do whatever they wanted to do. And that's why we have radical variation in child support obligations. I mean, it's quite remarkable. If you look at, for example, New Mexico and Texas, you can pick two towns that are a few miles apart from one another. And in Texas, a parent will owe $800 a month in child support, and in New Mexico, it's $250 a month in child support. Same facts. Why is that? It doesn't make any sense. The federal government could be much more controlling in how it did that. And some of the recommendations I made were to require that there be a parenting time adjustment and so forth. I don't know that the federal government's going to be very involved in micromanaging this and forcing the states to create really good child support programs. I don't know if that answers your question just at all. But all I know that in order for the country to survive, we need courage. And courage can be taught by fathers.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. In back, I think we have. Oh,
last one.
Elaborating on what you were saying about the variations, the differences across counties within the same state and across the country. How is it that the federal government can provide funding and at the same time not have a one-size-fits-all policy? And why are the interest charges different in different jurisdictions in each of the states? How do they get around that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that the child support system was just poorly designed at the federal level, and it allowed a great deal of leeway to the states to do what they wanted to do, and the states did radically different things. I mean, some states have a percent of obligor model for child supports. Most states now have an income shares model. They're very different from one another. They make different assumptions, and they have different implications, and the feds have just sort of walked away from it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and please feel free to reach out.
So everyone online, we are going to take a 15-minute break, but please stay on. We have two great speakers coming up, one at 4, Lisa Britton, a journalist who supports a champion for men's rights, and we have the founder of the Parental Alienation Study Group at 4:30. Please stay with us. Yes, one more announcement.
Break is 3:45 to 4. Get the food whenever you want. Right outside here to the left is cookies, brownies, soda, coffee.
For our president, for our people here. Thank you all.
I'm still waiting.
See you at 4.
All right, guys, we're going to be live again in about 15 minutes. We're going to cut off, and then we're going to restart to get a refresh of our system. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.
It looked like blurred. Look, you can't see. Is that which one is the camera that goes?
I'm going. This is just live. I'm going to go through. I'm going to get all the presentations,
slides,
and then I'm going to put slides up. I have nothing else to do besides play video games
and make music and illustrate music.
So yeah, if I got my thumb drive. If I can get a copy put onto my thumb drive,
I have them. I just get permission to be able to do it.
And then literally, I'll just go back and I will do a much better temperature, and then I can actually add the slides right up onto the screen. So this is just live. I'll go through
Okay.
and be like, this was recorded live,
Sure.
but played as recorded.
How many Zoom people do we have?
We had 20 at one point. You kept it steady. It's not dropping. A few, if one or two jump off, others, yeah, it's been like.
I know you were talking to Philip earlier, right?
Philip was there? Yeah, yeah. Hello.
Absolutely. Because I come from the most most country, Georgia. We have like even head of the church is called patriarch because captain cannot on camps of ship cannot have no captain, and if God's rules are tweaked and changed, so my nation Georgia like very like Italian type.
Yeah.
Very
We have similar there, man of the house. You good? You don't have anything.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Bill, good. No, good.
Thank you for coming.
Love you.
Good.
But I like your sense of humor. Your sense of humor. So, you're humorous and not hostile.
No. Yeah, you're good. No one's hearing that online.
Have we
They're all
met
still
before?
hanging out. I think a lot of them.
What's your name?
They stepped away, so that's good. The camera's
Tia?
off.
I'm from Wismar.
Yeah, no, that's trouble. That's good. Looking forward to hearing you talk. Good.
Oh, okay. All right.
So again, nice
So
to meet
hi,
you.
Brian. Yes.
The statistic about shared parenting, I have a question about. And here's why in the United States. So I personally did oversaw a court file study in Minnesota back in 2010.
Where do you live?
Minnesota.
Okay.
So I oversaw a court file study. We looked at 430 files in 7 counties. We physically have to pull them out of the file for but that study found that Minnesota at that time had 35% population.
About the slide I showed on equal share parenting.
Well, it showed 5%, and then we did a follow-on study in 2018 that showed that equal share parenting in Minnesota had increased to 43%. Wow. So that 5% statistic is.
I've asked myself that question. I think they were using a very rigid definition, 50-50. So 45, 55, 55.
Okay, well, I used 50-50.
Yeah. Oh, you did?
I did.
Oh,
Yep.
interesting.
Yeah, and it was marital. It was disillusion for children because the paternity cases, the non-marrieds were sealed. They unsealed those 5 years ago in Minnesota, and we're looking to do an updated study with all of them because they involve paternity testing and they accept that confirmation. And then for whatever reason, all of a sudden, 5 years ago, they didn't carry them. They opened them up. So I will grant you, but I think you referred to divorce for kids, and that's specifically the files we looked at. And in Minnesota, which, I mean, that's as blue of a state as any. We had 35%, and you had 43.
Right.
And probably higher yet now. So,
Actually, yeah, I take your point completely. Partly I used that graph because it was a visual representation of multiple countries. So I was trying to make a point. But I agree the definition is problematic.
And it
It may be
maybe
inaccurate.
is what was the case when judges decided the case. See, in our state, and I suspect in the others, only 5% of cases are decided by judges. All the other ones are marital termination agreements. And often under stress because dad starts out fighting for equal shared parenting, ends up with losing his financial resources. And it's like, okay, I'll settle for X, Y, or Z. Okay. But even in that case, 43%. So I just wanted you to be aware of that.
And I just, and I'm not an expert on Judge parenting, so I'm spoken ignorant to it. But there's an important difference between a judge-decided decision versus a judge verified or a judge seal.
Approved.
I mean, yeah, like when I went through my process, the lawyers, I just demanded 50%, and they knew I really was serious to fight for that. So everybody agreed with it. And it would put it in plan of the judge.
Yeah. And I've seen many cases, again, I looked at 430 files.
Right.
Studies, staff, and
Yeah. Yeah.
many cases where you requested that study. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, every other weekend, Wednesday night, and then we're gonna like split the summer up.
Tell me again why that happened. I don't understand.
Because they're out of money. They start out with the lawyer, they fight for 50-50.
But wait, if they're out of money, they would rather 50-50 is the best situation to deal with financial.
Right, but the ex won't let them have it. And they don't have the money.
We're not agreed to it. So you're saying, let's say we're talking about $500. Let's talk about, say, $1,000 per month versus $500. So if a father is financially, in trouble, he would rather have the $500 obligation, of course.
He would,
right?
but the mom would like to have $1,000.
But so she is willing to force him into bankruptcy. That's what you're saying.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. Absolutely. They don't care. They know the program's going to make their ex's life a living hell. And they're going to chase them. They hear the stories, where they're throwing people in jail.
Right.
So they're counting on the program to deliver that money.
And so if he does